June 11, 2018, and so I will call the Operations Work Group meeting to order. And so we do have a couple of public up there. Okay.
I got the timer.
Well, I will start where James has left off then. Thank you, James. Okay. Glasses, I apologize for the delay.
Well, I was about to welcome Emma, and I don't know that I did or not, so did we all say welcome to our newest board member?
Yes. Okay. I'm missing my glasses
Yeah,
here.
a lot of fun.
Okay, great. Well, yes, welcome, Ahmad. We'll get started, and we have two public appearances. The first is Margaret Rubio, followed by Chris Carusi.
Sorry, kind of new to this one.
Okay, you just come and take a seat, that middle seat at the end of the table.
I thought my son, who's 12, wanted to say something. Apparently, he just chickened out. He said no.
Okay, and the green light is on, and so, Margaret, you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I came because I came on behalf of MPIE and also my son. He's 12. He goes to Badger Rock, and he has a lot of issues. My issue with the school is that there's not enough eyes there to keep an eye on him. We were just talking about this, and I was talking to him about, he asked me why we were here, and I said, well, this is about the cost of living, pay, and the cuts that are being proposed. We need to really try to keep people that know what they're doing in the school system and that care. I mean, I couldn't have explained it better to my kid. There's a place that pays $10 and $2.50. If you had to pick a place where you needed to go to work, where would you go? He said the place that pays $10. We were talking about education too. There's not, if you don't, you can't pull people for a job that don't have sufficient education and training. And my son can see that. There was another situation that happened on Thursday that could have been avoided if you know how my son behaves. And sometimes you can see him, he's 12, perfectly normal boy. But at times he sees the shiny red ball and he doesn't see anything else. And he inadvertently bumps into someone. That someone started to shove him and push him back, knowing how my son was. And my son reacted and elbowed the kid. My kid got punched in the head. And then the kid tried to punch my kid again in the face. If there were sufficient eyes that were looking and saying, hey, I don't have to be right next to Joshua, but I'm right over here. I can see Josh and I can see so-and-so. That's all I need. But we need people that are trained and that can talk to him. Because again, my son was so upset that he said he wanted to take the scooter and run it into the road to have a car hit him. Because he felt so upset. And people look at him and they say, you're such a good boy and this and that. Yes, he is. He's polite, he's helpful, he's funny, he's energetic, he's caring, he's very intelligent. But because of his behavioral needs, he's a little bit too much sometimes. And I just wish that there were more people that care. He mentioned a lot of other teachers. I said, you need someone like a Mr. B or someone to hang out with, someone to keep that extra eye. Because kids nowadays, there's so much going on. We don't need it in our schools too. Teachers deserve that. If they're there for the right reasons, they deserve that. And my kid deserves better. And I'm just here to ask for my kid and everybody else. We need good teachers, good staff, good training, good education. Make them go to the place that's, pays $10 and $2.50. Because my kid needs it, and so does everybody else. It's very detrimental to our kids. I don't want my kid to one day go in the street because he gets so upset by it. He said, I didn't mean it. It was an accident. Every day there's like 20 accidents, isn't there? But every day we still get up and we try again. Help my kid try a little harder. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Carusi?
So I'm also here to speak in support of investing in our staff and supporting our staff. First, I want to thank you for funding the full 2.13% cost of living adjustment for our staff. This is really, really important for staff retention and staff morale, and I urge you to give them this bare bones increase when you approve the budget next week. I also appreciate the very difficult decisions you have to make about what to cut from the budget to pay for this cost of living adjustment. However, some of the suggested cuts that are going to be presented tonight would adversely, either directly or indirectly, impact family and community engagement and our lowest paid staff. Some of these cuts include community schools, parent academy, FACE teams, the ELL evaluation, student conferences, and 9th grade mentoring. And the materials provided tonight don't actually go into detail about how these programs would be impacted, but they're all really important. The funding to address wage compression for SEAs and EAs is also on the chopping block, and that is problematic. I urge you to seek out budget savings to fund this cost of living adjustment that will not adversely impact our most vulnerable families and students, and that won't impact our lowest paid staff. These might include staff travel to conferences, room rentals for trainings and events, or consultants. I also wish to comment on the sustainability of future cost of living increases for our staff. Reading through the presentation tonight, it's sort of presented as we're getting cuts from the state, and so we can't give cost of living increases to staff anymore. It's not sustainable. I urge you to shift your mindset and consider the entire budget when thinking about state cuts. Maybe we can't afford the 3-year technology replacement rate, or maybe we can't afford the current curriculum replacement rate. There's lots of ways we can make our budget meet the state budget, and investing in our teachers and our staff is the most important investment we can make as a school district. Finally, I hope you will question the wisdom of the $2 million land purchase near Hawks Landing. For me, here's what it boils down to. The developer profits from a school in the development because it increases the property values, and MMSD is footing the bill. If we can't afford annual cost of living increases up to the rate of inflation for our staff, then we really can't afford to subsidize real estate developers. Again, I urge you to support the full cost of living increase for our staff in a way that has the least impact on our most vulnerable families and our lowest paid employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So next agenda item is our approval of the minutes. And so I move that we approve the minutes from the Operation Work Group meeting dated, is this true? January 22nd, 2018.
Second.
Ahmad, your advisory vote? Aye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes pass. Okay, and with that, we are on to the safety plan update.
All right, thank you, Mary.
Okay,
I'd like
you're
to invite
welcome.
our team to come on up. We've got Karen Kepler, Chad Weezy, Matt, and Mike Berry, who will be joining us for the conversation today. Mike, you're joining, right? You did know this. Yeah, we've got two big topics tonight, starting with safety update, and then leading into our discussion about the budget, the preliminary budget. I want to acknowledge and thank the safety and security team that has been working over the last several months intensely and in earnest to examine all of our policy, practices, facilities, and determine a path forward for our district. That team includes the four that are here, but additionally Joe Ballas, who is here tonight, Brian Holmquist, Quinn Craw. I'm just incredibly thankful for the work that they've done on this, and I think you'll see why as we get into the presentation. We're hoping to get some guidance from the board tonight, specifically on a couple of policy changes that we need to make, which Matt will talk about. and strategy, which what Karen and Chad will lay out with some specificity, and of course budget, because what comes out of this discussion will flow into our discussion about the preliminary budget that you'll be voting on in June. So with that said, I'll pass it right over to Karen, and we're gonna get going. Oh yeah, actually, did you want me to say a little bit about this? I wanted to also frame this conversation as it relates to our, ongoing kind of major priority, which is to make sure that every school has a safe and supportive environment. It goes without saying, but is always worth repeating. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thanks, Jen. So just a statement and where we're going with this. Currently, school safety concerns, you guys all know about the national and local level, Act 143, and with the recent release of the Wisconsin Department of Justice School Safety Initiative program, called for Madison School District to re-examine our level of safety proficiency across all our MMSD schools. Just knowing that this team and many, many staff within our district and also principals take it very seriously around safety and security. And we want to make sure that we are providing and taking this responsibility very seriously and making sure that safety becomes a priority throughout and beyond. So tonight's presentation, we will follow this particular order. So I'll provide an update on our team's progress so far. We will have implications of Act 143. Well, Matt will speak to that. Chad and I will also talk about recommendations for the 18-19 school year and moving forward and ahead. We will also have budget implications. Mike Berry will talk more about that. And then the DOJ grant, where we are with the application. So after each section, what we'd like to do is pause and provide the board an opportunity to ask any questions around particular areas that we're speaking to, because we do acknowledge that this is a lot of information for you, but it does require we do want to invite the board for any clarifying questions or additional information that you need. If there's anything at this time that we can't provide to you tonight, we'll make sure that we're following up with you on that. So with that said, I want to move on to our safety and security status update from our team. So just so you know that we put it into 3 different buckets when our team last met and formed. Not last met, but when we originally formed our team back early March. We divided our work into 3 areas: school facilities, policy, practice, and procedures, and also training needs throughout our district. And with that, we made sure that the work, we used the current areas around identifying implications related to Act 143 around that area, which included on-site safety assessments of all student-occupied buildings. You'll see on there safety plans reviewed by local law enforcement, and also mandatory reporting of imminent threat and staff training needs around the current Act 143. So that was a big one that helped us guide our work on where we needed to go to the end of the year and also for next year's planning. We also took quite a bit of time assessing our facilities and policies and practices and procedures. The 2 policies that you will hear tonight about recommended revisions from Matt Bell will be 4147, student and employee safety, along with 422. Student welfare. We also conducted high school safety audits and district-wide facilities assessments, so we began that initial work, but we know that we have to continue more of that work going into next year. And we completed a Department of Justice grant application, and all that was done in the last 10 weeks. So we take it very seriously and want to make sure that we have a good action plan going into next year.
Okay, I'll move on to the policy revisions. And we have had safety plans in the district for quite some time. They have never been part of board policy. I believe with Act 143, that needs to change. The board needs to not only approve the initial safety plan, but it also is required to review every 3 years and approve any revisions to that plan. So it's time that that safety plan become part of board policy. You'll see I did provide a draft of a revised policy. It has all the provisions that are required of a safety plan, including how we create them, how we review them, how we update them, the content, dissemination of the plan, the training. And there's one additional note. I do have, I would recommend, although it's not new, in the statute there is a requirement for fire drills, tornado drills, school safety incident drills. We have had to do those every single year for quite some time. That's been in the statute for quite a while. It's never been in board policy. I would suggest, as long as we're revising 4147 to include safety plans into that policy, that we include this statutory language on the other drills that we conduct.
I have a quick
Do
question
we want to
directly
go
related.
to the next policy, or do we want to?
It's directly related.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard this from many disabled parents, and I worry about it as well. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't run, hide, and take cover. It's not physically possible. Do we have a disability plan for individuals with special needs on what to do and how to get out?
Okay, so I think we will, Nikki, let's come back to that. Let's just get the
Okay, I
policies
just wanted to make
out,
sure.
and then we'll come back for discussion on these policies,
Okay.
and plus whether there's policies missing that, or situations missing that aren't covered by these policies.
All right, I'll move on to 4222. Previously, this policy was titled Reporting Child Abuse or Neglect. My suggestion would be that we rename it Mandatory Reporting, because also due to Act 143, we have a new mandatory reporting obligation. I normally wouldn't have you read off the slide, but I would really appreciate if all the board members could read the second bullet where it says all employees in the quoted language, because to
Matt, could you maybe just read it? Because I'm
Sure,
not sure
sure.
everybody
All
can.
right. So all employees shall report if the person believes in good faith, based on a threat made by an individual seen in the course of professional duties regarding violence in or targeted at a school, that there is a serious and imminent threat to the health or safety of a student or school employee or the public. That is our new mandatory reporting requirement, and I'd like to break that down a little bit further. So first of all, we have to have a threat that is targeted or at a school. It has to be made by a student who is seen in the course of the employee's professional duties. And then that employee has to have a good faith belief that there is a serious and imminent threat to the health or safety of a student, an employee, or the public. So that's our standard now for this new mandatory reporting law. If those elements are all met, employees are required to report by telephone or in person to a law enforcement agency. The final bullet up there is there will be training coming out from DPI on this obligation. It's not done yet. I have not seen it yet. Once we receive that, we would certainly provide it to the board so you can all be aware of the training that DPI is recommending. And that will be mandatory training for all staff members. 2 additional points. There is if an employee is found to intentionally violate this mandatory reporting provision, there may be a fine of not more than $1,000 or imprisonment of not more than 6 months. And there is also a prohibition in the Act 143 that does not allow us to require a staff member to consult with or report to an administrator first before making this mandatory report. So that's a prohibition on what we can put in our policies in terms of requirements prior to reporting.
Okay, so why don't we start with policies, Gloria?
So are you suggesting that we put this language under this BOE policy 4222, reporting child abuse or neglect?
That's my my recommendation, because the mandatory reporting requirements in terms of who has to report are similar. In fact, they're exact. exactly the same for child abuse and neglect and this new mandatory reporting requirement. So that was a suggestion I had. Whether we wanted to pull it out into a different policy would be a possibility. It just
Yeah.
fit under that general category of mandatory reporting.
Yeah, I would like that it be separate. I mean, I understand the mandatory reporting component. I'm just wondering if we do separate it out as policies that are mandatory to report, and then include reporting of a child abuse or neglect, and then this one,
Okay.
right? Because I think, even reading this myself was like, is this about child abuse or neglect? I mean, I think it really is sort of something we should highlight and, bold it, just like that.
All right. Thank you.
2 questions. And that on 143. One, under this, technically, how are we defining employees? Are board members? Since we are paid a small stipend, are we considered employees? And the reason I ask is under legal privilege, I need to know whether or not, if a client tells me something that is a threat to the school, am I mandated to report it? Am I not mandated to report it?
Actually, I think we would need to probably clarify that through policy, because in most other policies, board members are not included as employees. So we would want to clarify that through policy. So good suggestion.
And just on the other previous one, can we please develop a disability plan? Because, as I said, we can't run, all of us.
Kate?
So on this one, is the fine a part of the state statute?
Yes.
It specifically has to do that, those.
Yeah. And it's, I want to stress that there needs to be a finding of intentionally violating.
I just wanted
Okay.
to see if we had any degrees of freedom.
No, that's right in the statute.
Great. And then on 4147,
Back up.
on 4147, under safety planning, emergency preparedness for safety plan content, I'd love to be a little bit more specific about who the school safety team is and what their responsibilities are and how frequently we expect them to meet. In particular, there was some stuff that we had spoken about earlier around risk assessment, and there's some good recommendations out in the public sphere around what that team would look like in terms of incorporating a wide diversity of staff and maybe even community members. So if we could just blow that out a little bit, I think it would help provide some guidance around what we expect that group to do and who should be on it. And I can chat with you offline about it if you want details.
Okay.
TJ?
2 or 3 things. One is, this appears on the agenda as a discussion item. When do we have to when are we expected to, and when must we pass these new policies?
These are in the safety plan revision. We are required to have our safety plan done and drafted by January 1 of 2019. Okay. The mandatory reporting requirements went into effect immediately. DPI didn't have any training regarding it immediately. That's often the case. So those are in effect now. So we're under the statutory obligation to make those reports, whether they're in policy or not.
So do we have a calendar though for when we are going to?
I believe that the thought process is that we would vote at the end of this month at the regular board meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's good to clarify that
Yeah.
because it was not as an action item on the agenda tonight, I don't believe. It was as a discussion item.
Yeah, for tonight it was discussion only.
But
Yes.
usually it's flagged as an action item for the following meeting.
Oh, my apologies.
And
That
wasn't
was
done. So,
the intent, TJ. Yeah.
Second one is, it said notes here that the staff training around nonviolent crisis resolution is revised. This spring we spent something like $138,000 on training the trainers and materials for that. I believe that today there's actually staff training went on for that. Will what we've done so far fit the new requirements?
Yeah.
You want to hit that right now? Or is it coming up later on?
It's going to come up at the staff training.
Okay. Okay, just that was, and then the last thing is, do we have a plain language or anecdotal or some kind of understanding of what serious means at this time. Serious and imminent, but particularly the serious. Imminent, I think we all kind of...
Tarasoff.
I'm somewhat waiting for DPI guidance. I hope the training clarifies that. It's certainly not a term that's defined in statute. And so again, I hope DPI has some guidance around that, and that we will, whatever guidance DPI has, if it's left somewhat nebulous, we would then do additional training to provide guidance as to what serious and imminent threat looks like.
Can't we use Tarasoft? Direct knowledge that an individual's threat to oneself, that we have direct knowledge that an individual's threat to oneself or others.
But what's the serious level?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think Tarasoff, that was a therapist case where the therapist had direct knowledge and a direct threat against an individual and didn't report. I don't know that used serious and imminent as the exact language, but I can certainly check. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, just practically, is I'm going to scratch your arm a serious threat? Is I'm going to break your finger a serious threat? I mean, I think that, where does serious lay on this continuum? I think that's very important for
Absolutely.
a whole worst case scenario. There's a whole lot of things we're going to have to be doing different.
Yeah.
And
I think I agree with you 100%, and I think I would just add that I do also believe that phrase good faith belief is important, and I think it requires knowledge of our students. So if a student has come in every single day of the school year, and maybe it's a student who has a disability and said, I think I'm going to shoot up this place,
Kid with Tourette's. Yeah.
Right, right. We have to have knowledge that student, knowledge of where that student's coming from to develop that good faith belief. So I think that's an important phrase in the statute as well.
I do also worry about some of our nonverbal students with disabilities who, the students who have come up in the issues around the expulsion letters. I worry that there will be mandatory police reporting for their behaviors. And if we can carve out exceptions in our implementation and policy, it would be very, very much appreciated. If, and I understand that's an if.
Sure.
I would also second that because that terrifies me, putting individuals with disabilities in the system.
Can we get back to raising hands here?
Yeah, Nikki, you're out of turn. Dean?
Yeah, okay. I wanted to reemphasize what you just said. I don't like believes in good faith clauses in things like this, because the examples are just too many. That people believe a lot of things in good faith which are ridiculous. So how we train around that, which you suggested, to me is important. It's anything, as TJ gave you some examples, anything could be interpreted as good faith, that's a serious threat, which are sure to some people, most of us know, or the other way around. So that bothers me. So how we interpret it, how we train it, how we can give examples, clear examples of what is, what's not, and what's good faith and what isn't, and that's important. That I want to emphasize that.
We've got a lot of work ahead of us in terms of ensuring that we're faithful to the statute, but not over-identifying in inappropriate situations.
Okay. Good to move on?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, as you can just imagine, our work to provide the board our safety team recommendations for 18-19, we spent quite a bit of time re-examining our current safety standards and practices and policies to make sure we're heading in the right direction. Thinking about securing necessary resources to achieve those standards, and consulting with Madison Police Department, other community agencies, and other architectural consultants to make sure that what we are providing as recommendations are of best practice. In the short time frame that we have, we want to make sure that we're we're heading in the right direction and making really good informed decisions and providing you that opportunity to make them as well. So I will take, of our team recommendations, I will take the number 1 and number 2, and then Chad will come on with the facility side of that. And before I begin, I just want to answer Nikki's, she addressed the concern about students with disabilities with evacuation prior to Act 143. We already had something in place to review evacuation techniques of all our students in our district. So there has already been, the good thing is that our district does a great job with reviewing and revising what we do, and it's not just dependent upon a state statute to do so. And so that has been already put in place and required from our staff going into next year about evacuation techniques.
May I just say something, Mary?
Sure.
It's just a parent with a kid with disabilities called me and stated that she trained her son, like the school suggested, that they go, at a fire drill, they go to the parking lot. And that's fine, he's autistic. Only to find out that she was told by the different aide and a different teacher that no, actually they have to march to East High School. And it wasn't clear on how it worked, and he needs to know in advance so he doesn't panic. How do we get those messages out?
Yep, so that's definitely a focus for us next year, ensure it's consistent across all our schools. And that message will, definitely we note that. So going into next year, increased staff training, and this will address TJ's around the cost of the training. We want to make sure that our goal to provide staff training to all of our staff. So it is a pretty big task going into next year, making sure that there's recommended training that is occurring across all our schools. We need to review our current and newly revised safety procedures to ensure consistent practices in place. Skill and response is also in place across all school environments for the 18-19 school year in accordance with state statutes, school board policy, and best practice. And so there is a picture of our emergency procedures. Every 3 years, those procedures do need to get reviewed and revised. And the school district did that 3 years ago. So even though it wasn't part of the board policy, they were abiding by state statute at that time. We know that we do need to spend each year time reviewing our current visitor policy, make sure that procedures are in place around that and staff understand visitor policy, securing entrances, active supervision during recess and transition time. That should be just annually revisited. It's good practice. We also have in place critical and behavior response teams at every school. That has to be reoccurring every year, and that isn't a cost. It's just making sure that that's getting done. What we do know that there are 2 things that are currently needing to be revised, and that is, the second one is the nonviolent crisis intervention, and that is it's a more comprehensive restraint and seclusion protocol, and that has already, the cost that we will talk about today that's not addressing that. It's going into some other trainings that we need. So we understand, we just wanted the board to know that that's already in place, and that was in place prior to Act 143. We were already planning on that. So that's current in motion. We do know that we need to revise our Code Red protocol, the lockdown, and that does need to include active threat shooter training in accordance and work with MPD, Madison Police Department, around that. We do need, that's a big task that we need to retrain all our staff on that revision on that protocol. The new one that we need to put in place is our mandatory reporting of imminent threat of school violence. We do understand how that can cause some confusion. We want to be really crystal clear on that, and that's going to require the training that needs to be provided to all staff, as well as the trauma-informed practices. While that's not a requirement from Act 143, it is a requirement from the application from the Department of Justice grant application. We do need to provide 3 hours of training on trauma-informed practices. So with all that, the estimated cost for training materials is anywhere from the range of $120,000 to $230,000. Please know that it's really about time and location of that training. It's where the cost is going to be in fluctuation. So I'm just going to pause there if you have any questions or need something to clarify.
Will we use pre-existing professional development opportunities days, or will we be designating new ones and requiring new subs and new pay and things like that?
Yeah, it's, so we have a lot of planning to do this summer to think about the opportunities. We definitely want to use some of already, staff days that are already set aside. We do have some welcome back days that we are going to designate for that before school starts, because that's where we can reach most of our staff the first 2 days of before school starts. So we'll have that. But then ongoing, there's other development that we need to make sure that we have it right before we are rolling it out to staff. So it just will take some time.
And then there's been controversies over various active shooter protocols. And I guess before we pick which protocol we're going to train people in, I think some kind of communication with the board would be good, because there's been controversies about the appropriateness for different schools and different levels of school, elementary versus high school and things like that. So,
and that's also part of the slowing it down, TJ, is just making sure, one, adults are trained, but then also the appropriateness of how we're explaining this type of drill to different levels of our schools. We totally get that.
Communication around the choices being made there would be appreciated.
No doubt.
Yeah, and just to build on that point, I think there's two comments inside that. One is kind of craze as an idea, right? If it's hide fight, or if there's been the philosophy there is one thing, and then how we talk to different age groups about whatever the philosophy is that we select is a separate thing. And both, I would definitely want to be kept in the loop. Can you just share a little bit, when was the last time our staff was trained on active shooter training? What was the philosophy used at that point?
So every year we are required to do a Code Red drill, Code Red lockdown drill. And so that's every year twice, one for each semester. So staff have
Training in advance of that, or is it just a drill?
it's a drill. That's staff are to have it before school starts, so you go through the whole emergency plan. What we want to ensure is that we are getting consistent training across the district, because it's school-based dependent on who's providing that information around that drill.
And what's the current guidance on active shooter training that we're giving?
It's to actually secure yourself in the classroom, lock it, and hide within your classroom.
And that's the adjustment we're looking at making. Precisely why.
There is it's act, deny, defend, and what we currently do not have is the defend part of it. So it's about how to defend yourself when something is going on.
And that piece we're going to talk about before we align on as a district, or is that, I mean, is that a decision that's been made that we are going to pursue defend?
We definitely can talk more and get some input from board. It makes sense.
I have a 6-year-old, right?
What's that?
Yeah, can you explain where the safety team is? On which
Well, the
training
safety
we
team
want
where
to-
we are, and of course we can follow up with more additional information for you. CRAZE is what currently Madison Police Department uses, that they trained community members around that and churches. So if they're
Not so
approving.
many 6-year-olds.
What's that?
Not so many 6-year-olds.
And we understand that.
We
Keep
understand.
going, Karen.
Yeah. So we have that, and we do need to get approval from local law agencies along with the board to approve our safety plan. So,
I mean,
drill.
look, gosh, I looked at this stuff a lot several months ago, and it seemed like this was the current trend in theory, and that there wasn't a lot of necessarily evidence that any particular theory was better than another. So given that, do we believe that the cost from a kind of trauma perspective is worth the benefit, right? So it's just a question to discuss before we kind of fully roll that
It
out.
definitely is on our mind about that, about how we perceive. And being a previous elementary principal, I do take that in.
It's very different than
It
most
is.
of the parties that participate in this kind of training are very, very different stakeholder groups, so.
Yeah, we agree. I think I'd want to be a little more explicit about where we're standing on this. My understanding is from the safety and security team is that we do want to adjust our training and go beyond just the lockdown. So there would be some incorporation of the
And what's the reason
defend
why?
component. Let me come back to that in a minute. And we have been talking a lot about developmental appropriateness of the training. So we want to actually design and revise what might be out there to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate depending on the level. You know, obviously in tandem with experts. We'll come back to you on exactly what that would look like, but we don't think simply staying committed to the lockdown approach is appropriate. And maybe you can expand a little bit more about why we've landed there.
Well, our safety plans do need to be reviewed and revised by and approved by local law agencies along with the Board of Ed. And where other school districts are, they actually have incorporated ACT, Deny, Defend. Whether it's ALICE training or CRAZE, we do need to go with one or the other. And it's been one that we're working with Madison Police Department, that is how they are incorporating their training. We do need to do some additional training and consideration and work with Madison Police Department around how that then gets rolled out to students in our classrooms.
Yeah, I'd be curious your take on it, Gloria.
Yeah.
So I've seen the CRACE training done, particularly at churches where there's a lot of kids, but kids are not actually there to watch it. It is really training the adults in the room to prepare them on how they're going to respond. So, I mean, it really is not geared toward a 6-year-old to defend, you know, anything, right? It is really guiding the principals and the staff and the teachers of how to respond. And it's gone really well in the churches that I've seen it done. So, but I think it would be worthwhile for the board to actually see it and go through it so that you get a sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Okay, teacher?
Do we have a choice of local law enforcement agencies? Could we work with the Dane County Sheriff rather than MPD?
In the policy on developing the safety plan, there's a requirement that we get feedback and advice from different any local law enforcement agency that has jurisdiction. So we could work with both, and actually I would encourage that. More opinions, the better. So yeah, I whether one is better than the other, I have no idea, to be honest, but we could work with both.
And I don't know, and I don't have any opinion whether which of the protocols, whether CRAZE is the right protocol. But if we as a district have problems with the application of CRAZE and MPD is committed to CRAZE, then I can see a situation where we might want to shop around for someone who's not committed to it. And again, I don't know at this time, so, but just seeing what the options might be in the future.
Okay. Any others? No? Okay. Okay, just a reminder that before we create and update any school safety plan, school districts are required to conduct an on-site safety assessment along with local law agency of each school building site and facility. So what we're recommending with that is 2 parts to this, is conducting around on-site assessments, which is a good practice to do. So we would like to develop along with consult with other groups to develop an assessment tool to make that happen, and then work and conduct on-site safety security assessments of each facility to guide safety and security improvements for procedural training needs or facilities management in the future. So getting into the habit of routinely assessing our buildings.
The estimated cost for this would be some consultants' fees to get us started and launched. We do not have something like this in place, and we do want to work with a third-party consultant. Initially this semester, we worked with Wisconsin Safety and Security Coordinators Association to begin looking at our high schools and creating an assessment tool around that, and that was really informative to us. And so we do feel like this is an important recommendation to consider.
Okay, so that's where I come in. So as Karen mentioned, we did have the Wisconsin School Safety Administrators Association come through and take a look at our high schools, and that was not only the kind of the protocols and staff culture and student culture in place, but also to point out some things that we can improve in our facilities. Down the road, we're actually required to assess all of our buildings, and I think we're kind of just getting ahead of what we know will come up as flags on facilities assessments down the road, and we just have a series of recommendations that we think we'd like you to consider to make our schools safer. And quite simply, we're going to try to work from the outside in as far as these assessments go. So first, I'd like to start with a round of recommendations when it comes to exterior doors. I was amazed when this number actually came out of this assessment. We've got nearly 1,300 exterior doors around our district. At this time, we monitor very few of them electronically during the day. So our means of making sure that they're closed during the day, we rely on teachers and adults, and quite honestly students. When you leave a building and the door is locked and it closes behind you, and we'd expect that during the day, guests come into the building through assigned entrances, and the rest of those doors are really off limits for anyone to come into our building. But that's really the only mechanism we have to monitor that that's indeed the case, that our exterior is locked down during the day. So one of the recommendations we'd have is to firm up that perimeter and monitor those doors to make sure that they're closed 24/7 unless we want them unlocked and propped open. And that is, it's an expensive endeavor to do that. That requires wiring and hardware at each of those 1,300 doors that comes back to a central monitoring system, and we would have a means both locally. The school would be alerted when doors were propped open and have the ability also to monitor them centrally if a door is propped open at a school for any significant amount of time, to alert the school to lock that door and secure our perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, how do we prevent, for example, someone, we saw this with the Ring doorbell of managing to hack the system, so it looks like the door is closed on the video, and it isn't closed. How do you control that from happening electronically?
Can you clarify that?
Basically, computer-wise, how do we prevent someone from getting hold of the system that shouldn't have access to the system and use it in a way it shouldn't be intended, i.e., one, unlocking doors that shouldn't be unlocked?
Yeah. I can't get into all the technicalities. I know that this system would be on our side of the firewall, so it would be a closed system that you wouldn't be able to access from the outside.
I wanted to know if it was closed open. I just couldn't figure out how to say it.
Okay.
Teacher?
This is approximately $1,500 per door. That's a lot.
It is.
Sure is.
It's a lot. Currently, things like how many of our doors are not alarmed when they're opened? I mean, I know at West they turned off the alarms for years, and I think
West and East are the only two schools that even have that functionality of the alarm.
And how much? And do we have a comparative price would be to alarm all the doors?
Alarming all the doors are probably about half the price.
Okay.
But what that does is then the reason they're off at West is because during the school day when students would run out the door, it became almost a nuisance. So this wouldn't be an audible alarm. This would be an alert that principals and security assistants or someone centrally would get an email or an alert to shut the door. I think students would come to start to get themselves trained, for a lack of a better term, to know that if you're propping a door open with a pencil on the back corner of East High School, that a security assistant's going to show up in 5 minutes and shut the door. But it would be less of the big panic bar and an audible alarm. It would be more having the ability to both locally and centrally monitor which doors were open.
I just see a lot of staff time spent monitoring. I see a response time on that not being large, whereas if I'm a teacher in a room and an alarm goes off in the hall right next to me, somebody's going to go outside and look at it. And if our if our students aren't respecting alarms, I think that they would learn to eventually. And I think that if we enforce things around that, and if we can save half the price, I think that $1,500 a door. And one other question says that we currently have 10 that are electronically monitored. Now, we've done recent safety improvements to improve video and actual human visibility around entrances, but we don't include those in this, because our main entrances for most of our schools have visual monitoring. Do they not?
They have camera monitoring, but there's nothing alerting if the door is actually closed. So.
I understand the difference, but the space itself is monitored, and people have to be buzzed in on the main entrances in all our schools.
Right.
And I understand that if it's propped open, then the person who's not buzzed in can follow beyond. I'm just checking the levels here.
Right.
Okay,
Thank
Dean, and then Nikki.
I withdraw.
Yeah, Ms. Rubio came and said something that we've all agreed with, that eyes, there's the 1,289 is at every exterior door, every single one, and they're not all used. Some of them are used pretty infrequently, and with better eyes and better training and alertness, it's $2 million. Damn. That's that. I don't want to cheap out, and we need to have this security in place and be confident about it, but putting one of these systems on every single door, maybe we better off barring some of these doors and make them not open at all. And as long as we've got adequate entrance and exits, there's just I'd like us to think a little bit more about that, and just, and also just having eyes and different training might be a way around some of this too.
Yeah, Dean, to that, we're actually finding that the doors that are most problematic around the district being propped open by students or staff are the ones that aren't used very often. That could be in a back stairwell that a student or a staff member needs to run to their car for something and shove a soda can in the door and run out the back stairwell. And half hour later they come back and the door is still open. So that it's hard. It'd be hard for me to prioritize which doors would be the most important. Every door that can get into the school, in my mind, is important.
Gloria, and then Nikki.
So I know it's a lot of money, but given what's happened across the country and the threat that's out there right now, I feel strongly that we have to take this. We have to do our best to protect our children. If something happens in one of our schools today and or next year, I feel it's a lot of money. I think we have to figure out how we make it happen. Is this a recommendation based on the people that went through?
Yeah, so this is
all the doors?
Yeah, so this is, I'd say, a recommendation on really 4 sources. So we had PRA, who's the local team of architects we work with, go through and assess all 50 buildings with the sole lens of safety and security. And quite honestly, I think they went in and they weren't looking for necessarily the Cadillac. They were looking to get us some type of baseline and what they would build in a newer school now. We certainly used the input of Karen's team that walked through the high school, and they certainly flagged outdoor entrances, inside entrances, and noted our camera system. Then our building services team and our safety team also provided some input on this as well.
And then another question is the grant that we've applied for, is this going to cover?
Yeah.
So Gloria, with that, let's
and I'll
hold
get to
off
the- yep.
on
Sorry, okay.
all the, because at the end, I think there's
get
a
to the
number
grant.
of them.
Okay.
So I think we should stick
All right.
with specifically the exterior doors and any issues, and then we'll come back
Yep.
to that. Nikki?
You stated that when
Okay.
people come, would access the door, then someone would come. My problem is that now we have a behavior education plan where people pick up the phone and no one comes. How do we know someone's going to come on this?
Well, I certainly think there'd be some staff training. We'd have to certainly familiarize ourselves with the system and how we'd use it on a day-to-day basis. But right now, we don't even have the information to respond to or train to.
Well, we're going to spend $2 million on doors that we don't know how to banner.
Can I make a suggestion that we get through the entire proposal? Because there are some big dollar signs throughout this presentation, and I'm feeling the response to that, and I want you guys to get through the kind of package of proposals to make it safer, and then kind of holistically look at what it would take to actually.
Yeah, let's not debate this. Let's just get the questions on this particular. So Kate, if you have a question on the proposal.
I don't perceive this as reaction to dollar signs. I think we're all eager to talk about this. We've been waiting a long time. So I'm very supportive of investing in our facilities to make our schools safer. I want to make sure we're spending the right money. So what are the other options to secure external doors? It's
okay. Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at one technical solution. I would assume there's a lot out there. What did you guys evaluate, and why do you think this one's the best?
Yeah, so there's certainly status quo, which is make sure all the door closers work and the hardware works, make sure all the doors are keyed during the day, and then rely on staff training and custodians and principals walking the perimeter of the building to make sure it's locked up. TJ mentioned the possibility of having audible alarms. I'm just picturing that as the former principal at La Follette, where there's maybe 80 or 90 exterior doors, many of which are used during the school day, and we encourage them to be used during the school day for 1,400 students to leave for lunch or leave at the end of the school day. And right now, the only audible alarms in the district are for emergency exit only. So to put audible alarms on all 1,300 doors, I'm not sure how that would exactly be feasible. And really, there's not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot more that we can do. If we want a centralized way of knowing when doors are propped open, this is really how they do it in schools right now. How they do it in, quite honestly, any building, a hospital or a police station or anything else. They've got little contacts at the top of the door that make a connection, and when that connection's not made, there's a signal that goes back to a computer and alerts someone that the door's open.
Is there also a farther step that's external control of doors, or is that not?
Well, I think there's building modifications. So if we built West High School again, we wouldn't put 80 doors on the outside. But we're a ways away from, we're not going in that direction. So I think we're kind of in the place that we have to try to modify and improve what we have. Yeah. A lot of it has to do with fire code.
We can't just have
breaking
less
up
doors because
breaking
of fire
up doors that
just
exist.
simply.
That certainly comes into play.
TJ.
I had a request that as we discuss the facilities remodels, that we be explicit about whether our rental facilities, especially Olin Avenue and Capitol High West, are being included or not included, and that attention be given to those also as they're given to the others. So just wanted to throw that on the table.
We could not include them in the grant application, but we're certainly including them in our plans moving forward. As a district, it's every kid, every adult, no matter where they go to school.
Okay, so then let's go on to the next one.
All right, I think the next one's potentially a little more clean cut. So we've slowly but surely gone from 0 cameras, and I remember this at La Follette High School a decade ago when we got our first camera wired by Joe Anderson and our electricians, to right now we're at a little over 900 cameras around the district. I can tell you, Karen can tell you, and Joe Ballas can tell you, there's barely a day that goes by that there is not a request from a school saying, my goodness, we need a camera in this hallway or this stairwell or in this parking lot. And we know if we added 485 cameras, the very next day there could be a request for 486. But we took a look at this. We had PRA take a look at this as well. Right now we're about, our camera system is kind of old and out of date. It runs on an analog signal, and all of the backup that happens for all the video happens locally on a standalone hard drive. So our recommendation would be to add some cameras around the district, 485 to be exact, and this team looked at hallways and stairwells and parking lots that were not covered with our current camera system, and we'd recommend a centralized backup that would happen each evening and download all of the video that happened from the day before. We have a redundant system so we don't lose video if a hard drive goes down. And that comes at a cost of $469,000. Questions there? Good. Lastly, and we've heard, we even heard from board members around this need. We've certainly heard from members of our teaching staff that our interior doors need a look. Our classroom doors are certainly not up to spec in terms of what we'd build in a new school now. So we examined a total of 2,519 interior doors through this audit, and our recommendation is that all doors that commonly house students and adults around the district are either lockable from the inside or always locked. And right now that's not the case for all the doorknobs in our district. Right now, a large number of classroom doors, if you'd like to lock the door in the event of a code red lockdown and your door was previously keyed open, you have to go into the hall, lock the door, and then walk back into your classroom to lock it. So we'd like that to change. We'd like our interior door hardware to be upgraded so all of the doors are always locked, or you have the ability to lock them from the inside. Mary, we're going to pause for questions.
No, I think we should look at what the options are before we get into questions.
Okay.
So Nikki, are you fine with waiting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a caveat on that, I know, and we actually, I think, had a speaker come mention this. There are tons of gimmicks out there right now with door wedges and bars and things you put on the closures. The DOJ and the fire department have been incredibly explicit that those are not allowed, period. For fire code reasons and ADA reasons, quite honestly, that we wouldn't want to bar a student or anyone into a setting that they couldn't find their way out. So we have a tiered series of things to consider, and I'd call them recommendations. Option one, and this came from PRA, and I agree with it. MATC just did this a number of years ago. Would be to install electronic door hardware on all those 2,500 doors. And that would mean doors that would be centrally monitored. So we would actually get alerts if we wanted them during the school day if a classroom door was open. And certainly in the evening, if a door wasn't closed, we'd have the ability to monitor if it was closed or not. Those doors would always be locked from the inside, similar to a hotel. Those doors would have keys that would be integrated into staff IDs. So you'd have a little chip in your staff ID and wave that in front of the door to open it. We'd have the ability to rekey a building at the click of a mouse. A new staff member starts that day, they'd get an ID and they'd have a key to the building. Summer school, there would obviously be some operational efficiencies we'd build in. So that's obviously the Cadillac model, that's a big number. Two would be to redo our district with standard brass key hardware that you have the ability to lock your classroom from the inside and out. That comes at about half the cost, and that's still all 2,500 doorknobs around the district. And third, we'd use either a phased or mixed approach, A phased approach might mean starting with the schools we deem most needy, having the most outdated door hardware. And you could go in the direction of upgrading to brass keys that lock from the inside or electronic. We could phase it and do some of our more complex buildings, like the high schools, that are really hard for us to maintain key control, and maybe take a look at electronic door hardware at some of the bigger schools and brass keys at some of the smaller. But the phased approach would mean kind of start us with a budget around upgrading our district with interior keys and door hardware, and we would take it from there. I know we're running long, so I'm going to kind of
Nikki?
pause for questions there.
On the internal locks, my question is this. Say a kid gets a hold of the ID, someone loses it, someone forgets it, etc., and someone gets a hold of it, locks something from the inside. As a kid who was bullied and growing up, my question is this. What happens when someone can't get out when it's locked from the inside?
It's always open from the inside.
It's always open from the inside. That's
Always.
what I wanted to make sure.
Yep.
So it couldn't be locked.
It can never be locked from the inside.
And is there going to be some kind of replacement or where we could deactivate them?
Yeah, that's the beauty of if we went with the electronic door hardware anywhere in the district. If we had a staff member lose their key or ID, it can be immediately disabled. Right now, a staff member loses a master key. The only option to redo master keys at West High School would be rekey the entire building if a master key's lost. So that's the issue with brass keys, is that if we redid every doorknob in the district, we're only as good as the first lost key. And then we're heading down the road again of having issues with key control.
You know, actually, Kate, if you don't mind, I think one of the things with how big these price tags are and everything, I think it would be wise to go into just how the proposal on how this would be paid for, so that as we discuss options, we're in light of where this money would come from. Is that okay? Let's then finish through with this whole section then.
Okay, so I'll address the budget summary. Budget stuff always falls to me, so here we go. First, I think, with Chad's presentation suggests that there are 4 things we want to be able to deliver on in terms of our, communication with staff, students, and parents. And that's the training, exterior doors, video, and interior doors. And that accounts for the first, I guess, 6 lines of that budget summary.
Correct.
You can see that these are pre-bid numbers. And obviously, just from this discussion, there's a wide variety of ideas around the different ways to approach the interior door hardware. Look at the price range, $1.1 million to $4.1 million. And I suppose the same is true of the various ways to secure the exterior perimeter, although we don't show it here on the exterior door monitoring. So those are the 4 that we want to deliver on. Net of the DOJ grant, which is shown in the middle of that page of about $1 million, the local impact to make those improvements could be anywhere from $2.7 million on the low end to $5.9 million on the high end. And that's quite a range, and I think it suggests the fact there are multiple ways to approach these problems or these challenges. So here's our thinking around this. First, we need to bid this work multiple ways, multiple add alternates, deduct alternates, different means and methods. We're just a little worried about price gouging going on in this industry right now. And we want to make sure that we protect ourselves from that. But bid it in multiple ways. I think the board's control point on this would be the consent agenda, as these items would start coming through. Obviously, they need a financial solution to go with them. So let's talk about the financial impact. As we've proposed this is a direct charge against the fund balance. The reason we did that was because we didn't want to set up which do you choose, your instructional program or your safety program. This is the reason you build up a fund balance, and this is a good, sort of one-time use for fund balance. Although, frankly, a $5.9 million fund balance draw is a very significant draw. So, so we're focusing on fund balance. We think that first, determine the actual scope and scale that we want to go with as we come out of these bid results. That's the first control point. Then that will drive how much of this would be funded by fund balance. Behind the fund balance, you've got TID 32 proceeds coming in next year, which are, we'd love to leave that alone, but it is possibly a funding source. We've even talked about.
Is it not?
I'm sorry?
2021 or 1920?
That'll come it'll come within the next 6, 7, 8 months, come in this next fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah. And it'll be about $3.8 million. Of course, there's an opportunity cost associated with that, right? If you do this, you can't do something else. Yeah, so first get it scoped out properly. Make sure we're satisfied with the solutions and the pricing that we're getting. Look first to the fund balance, potentially TID 32 behind that. We looked at note financing, spreading it out over multiple years. It's a possibility, but I'm not really in love with that idea. In that, what I like about it is you can do the work now and pay for it over time, but really all it does is drive up the project cost due to interest expense. If we can avoid it, I'd prefer to avoid it. So that's, it's as simple as that. The preliminary budget for July 1 does not have this in it. It was noted that that this was coming. My recommendation would be that we do address this in the preliminary budget, that we would put in the impact at its full amount, the full 5.9, with a heck of a footnote on that saying we're intentionally going worst case. It's obviously our goal to get the best value and the best solution, and then write it right into the budget. Now we'll come right back in October with a lot of the actual bid results at that point. We'll know much more about how this year's fund balance ended up, which we believe will be positive and will help the math on that, and then we'll know a little bit more about the rest of the budget. And I think we can take it on sort of a divide and conquer approach to these individual improvements.
Okay, I'd like to get through the rest of the presentation before we do the questions.
Yep. Last couple slides will just take real brief here. So we've had a few questions, it sounds like, around our DOJ grant submittal. In a nutshell, the DOJ had $100 million available. 35 million of that funding was classified as primary, and you could only apply for 2 things in the primary category: glass hardening film to your front entrances, and we were required to supply a square footage, and did so, or upgrading doors around your district that had no lock at all, inside or out. We don't have any classrooms around the district that can't be locked, so we only were able to apply for glass hardener on the primary, and then advanced, you could look at a number of different things to upgrade your facility or your training, and we went in the direction of applying for upgraded door hardware around the district. We've heard from the DOJ, this thing's like 99.9% in the can. We feel great about it, and I think we're actually here this week that all of it's been awarded. So kudos to Marcy Fiver Soderblom, who worked her tail off on it. But we're in line, at least it looks like, for about $1 million from the DOJ to get us kick-started in this process. We applied for the electronic door hardware, but the DOJ has already told us if the district decides to go in a different direction, we would just have to resubmit kind of a one-sheeter explaining, nope, we didn't want to do electronic door hardware, we wanted brass keys or something else. But it looks like the funding is coming our way, will be approved, and the DOJ wants us to spend it. Questions on that at all?
Chad, I would actually like to just get through the entire presentation before we go into then we can have all questions and all discussion on the table. So let's just motor through here.
Yeah, and we don't have to give this a ton of time. I guess the message of this slide is that this work is never done.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Excellent. Kate, you were still in the queue.
Okay. 4 questions. What is the timeline to have this done in your expectation? So
be more specific. What part of it?
interior doors, I believe we said we were going to have done by the beginning of this school year.
Yep.
Is that still where we're at?
So we would need a go-ahead with funding.
When do you need that?
As soon as we could get that's kind of why we're here tonight, to get some direction on what we'd bid out.
Okay.
So we'd go through, I mean, what you heard tonight, most likely, I think we'll probably bid new brass keys and/or new electronic door hardware around the district where we need it. Get those bid results back, get a number, and then the only way to move forward with that project would be for all of you to give consent to do the project with funding.
But we're on track to do that by the beginning of the school year if we...
The work would start the beginning of the school year at best. At best. The lead time on some of this door hardware is 6 to 8 weeks right now. And I only see that lengthening as we get closer to the start of the school year.
Okay.
Yep.
What feedback have you gotten from staff or other districts in terms of particularly the interior door choice?
We've contacted mainly through the Wisconsin school administrators, the security folks, and they're in buildings all over the state, and they agreed and really liked our option as far as the electronic door hardware. It was glaring to them that we had doors that didn't lock from the inside. I think that is a baseline when it comes to new school construction now.
And what about all of our doors that have windows or et cetera, interior doors in them?
Yeah, I think our expectation would still be that there's windows in our doors. I think we're kind of on a continuum from from doing nothing at all to building an airport or a prison, and we have to land somewhere in the middle. That it's still a school, and you can still see who's in the hallway. So at a minimum, I think as a basic standard, we want to be able to lock the door from the inside. There are some schools that have very big windows and even grates on the bottom that I would actually make the recommendation out of our own maintenance money. Some of those doors are 40 or 50 years old and were cheap when they were put in the school. That at the time we put in $1,000 or $1,500 in door hardware, that we would replace the door. But we would do that out of general maintenance money.
So there's a little bit of replacement.
There's a little wiggle, but okay. Our doors will still have windows. Yep.
And then just if you go back to your budget piece, I mean, it feels like, what's the difference between interior and exterior investments? I guess would it be wiser to have the electronic interior doors and forego some of our exterior door management, given that we aren't super clear on what the use of the information is right now? How would you think about that?
We could certainly have that conversation. We landed on, both with PRA and the folks we had as consultants, that if the bad guy never gets in the building, then we're better off than having to worry about shutting doors. Okay. And that's why we kind of went from the outside in.
Okay. I mean, my take overall, I would, if we're going to invest millions of dollars, we might as well do it right. The $2 million is still a lot of money for brass keys, right? So I would be supportive of going the electronic route. Maybe that looks phased, maybe that doesn't, but I'll be curious to see what you guys get back. And bigger concern would be moving fast. Just, we committed to
We'll go as fast as we can the second we have the thumbs up. You bet.
Nikki?
I'm not the best number, so let me ask a few questions, if I may, for clarification. So electronic locks cost approximately $4 million, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And air conditioning is $3 to $5 million a school, correct?
Depending on the size of the school.
And the health insurance for our teachers is $40,000 a year, correct? According to the budget operation work group.
40 million.
40 million, not thousand.
40 million. Okay. And support staff would be a $432,000 total one-time expenditure, correct? According to the, I'm looking at the compensation-based wage, the support staff handbook changes. The $432,000, where would that come from? I'm just trying to piece everything together in my mind.
Is there a question about budget sources
Yeah.
and uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about this? I mean, we're proposing using fund balance to fund a one-time expenditure, which is quite different from some of the other recurring costs that Nikki's laying out. Do you want to try to explain that a little bit?
We're trying to help, not put the board in a situation of having to decide upon, how many teachers versus do you want to do the security? No one wants to, So we kind of took the whole security package, took it offline and said, this is what we built the fund balance for. And let's leave the operating budget alone. You can decide on handbook issues and teacher pay based on their own merits within the operating budget. This is separate and distinct. This is just, what do you want to do? What's reasonable use of fund balance, and how far do you want to go?
Well, maybe, Mike, I think one piece of context that I didn't hear you say that I think, having been on the board for 6 years, we hear is that is fund balance, TID money are one time. And so matching them with when we use them, you match them with expenditures that are one time. Once you make them, they're not recurring. So some of the things you mentioned, health insurance, those are things that keep recurring. So it might be a $400,000 expense, but over 10 years, it's $4 million. So then it's tough to match those a one-time source. So Mike,
Good point.
Am I clarifying that's why
Yeah,
you...
we try to use fund balance for one-time items.
And Mike, you did say one thing, it was either Mike or Chad, and please forgive me if I got the person wrong, but that if we use one basket of money, we can't use it elsewhere, correct? So those are opportunity costs, okay? I just want to make sure, I want to understand how this works, and I'm not the best with numbers. I appreciate the explanation.
Well, Nick, another thing with, is at one time is we're going to have a facilities plan that comes to us. Those are one time. So I think that there are a number of other, there's another, that there are those opportunity costs, and we will certainly be talking about some things across our district, 50 schools, that this could be the cost for.
So I wanted to make sure.
You're doing fine.
Yeah. Dean, did you have your hand up?
Well, I just, I wanted to know more about this glass hardening paper or whatever it is. How does this stuff work? Does it stop a bullet? What's the deal with these things?
Yeah, it is a transparent film that's an aftermarket product that they would put on the existing window that needs to be professionally installed by a contractor, and it does not provide bulletproof glass. It hardens the glass. You can look up. There's 100 videos on this stuff now. That it would make it would make it really hard to bash the front door in with a baseball bat or kick it in and gain entry to the building. The fact that the DOJ only elected to allow you to just do the window pane on the very front of your building, we'd certainly have other glass that wouldn't be treated. We found it was probably best just not to leave any money on the table, so we applied for it, and we would firm up our front entryway. It makes sense in our welcome centers and so forth. But yeah, it wouldn't be bulletproof or anything.
Well, I'm still not
just
convinced that you applied for 37,152, and couldn't we put it back into switch that to door hardware or into the response training? Do we have limits on?
Yep. Yeah, you're only allowed to apply for $20,000 per building per category. So we maxed out both categories.
Okay. All right.
Well done. Teacher?
Questions kind of all over the place, and then some comments also. The electronic door hardware, is this wired or wireless?
It's kind of both. You have a wired Bluetooth node that's in the hallway, and then the door hardware itself is wireless, so it'd have a Bluetooth signal.
Okay. Bluetooth is eminently hackable. That's a fact of life, and something I think should be considered when we're investing close to $4 million. Would the installation work for either set of door hardware, would that be done by MMSD staff or or would it be contracted out?
I'd say a combination of both, but probably primarily it would be contracted out. We have some really good in-house carpenters as far as locksmiths, But the scope of the work and the timeline, we'd have no choice but to get some extra help.
The brass hardware comes to about $800 per door. That's correct?
Yeah.
And that entails, I mean, that's a heck of a lot for a door lock. And I mean...
Yeah, so the classroom door lock by itself is about $400 in hardware. And then you have to pay for contracted installation cost. So on average, we're at about $500 or $600 a doorknob for a classroom doorknob. But then we also accounted for gymnasiums and LMCs and cafeterias, and those can be $3,000 or $4,000 a door when you rekey big panic hardware.
What makes the doorknob so special? I mean, my understanding is that the reason you want to have interior locking doors is primarily a psychological thing. That you know, that studies that out of the incredibly and thankfully small sample size that an active shooter in his building has never gone through a locked door, and the interpretation from the studies I've read was that it was a psychological thing. And not that this door was impenetrable, because if an active shooter, you can shoot a lockout.
Correct.
I mean, so it's primarily psychological. So what makes these so special that they're $400? I mean, you can buy a door lock for $50.
Yeah, a commercial grade door that's what they cost. I mean, the new classrooms at Kennedy, that's what the door hardware cost.
Again, what makes them so special? You're telling me what it costs. I'm telling you.
I would say the build and the internal mechanism. That it isn't a doorknob you pick up off the shelf at Menards.
On to financial issues. Mike, would this be done through Fund 41?
It could be. It could qualify either under Fund 10 as general maintenance or Fund 41 as capital maintenance.
And if it was funded through Fund 10, it would have an adverse impact on future equalization aid?
You like any spending, yeah.
Yeah. And also under Fund 41 also, but less so?
Fund 41 allows you to sort of spread that impact out over a couple of years. That might, yeah, that's... We've been debating the impact on equalization aid, and we're thinking that it might be better off to simply take the financial impact on 1 year.
And that would be through Fund 10.
Right. Lose the 15% equalization aid, and because it gets maxed out. That might actually be a better strategy than losing 12, 13% multiple years in a row. We think it's probably better off as a 1 year Fund 10 impact.
To hit that. And when we talk about recurring costs and non-recurring costs and use of fund balance, a few things that I think belong on the table with this. One of which is that if currently there's a large gray area in what's recurring costs and what's a non-recurring cost. We have about $6.6 million worth of capital improvements going into our schools this year if we pass this budget at the end of the month. About half of those could be classified totally honestly and totally reasonably as recurring cost or non-recurring cost. Much of that is being funded by Fund 10. Some of it's through Fund 41, which is kind of also in that borderline between recurring costs and non-recurring cost. And so I think that that this isn't a yes or no question. There are things that fall into a gray area with that. And in light of that, things can be shifted around that. And then the second thing is that the fund balance has been built up by over $10 million in the last 2 or 3 years. And about $3 to $4 million of that was anticipated to be built up. About $6 million was it because we underspent on instruction. That was money that was collected from the taxpayers with a promise to be spent on educating our students as operating expenses. And according to the audit that we received at the end of the 2016-17 budget cycle, we underspent on instruction. So that was collected from the taxpayers on the assumption that we spent as operating, not as one-time non-recurring cost. And so again, there's flexibility in gray area here. And so I think that to me, with all these expenses, including the use of fund balance and the use of TID 38 and the use of TID 25, I think that we need to not be dogmatic about it, but I also think we need to be very, very, very aware of the impact on future state aid, future equalization aid. And I think that Mike's correct, I know Mike's correct, that there will be years in our near future where we will take the 15% hit. And definitely one, and I would guess that probably 2 out of 3 would be my guess. And that I think that that kind of planning is, for our taxpayers, is as important as anything else we do in relation to both this piece of the budget and the piece of the budget we're going to be talking about later. So that's my financial part.
Gloria.
Just wondering, have we received teacher or staff input on any of these options here, as far as like interior locks or anything? What you're presenting?
Other than just the certainly in my department, we get, especially if there's a spike when there's, either a local or a national incident, we get feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I need my doors locked on the inside.
Right.
So
I'm just wondering
if
I think it would be helpful for me to sort of understand and get input from our teachers and staff on what would best serve them day to day. We may be not missing something that we just don't know, right? So I think if we could get input from them, however way.
So I'm just going to speak to that. We have, within the 10 to 12 weeks that this has been, we've been really trying hard to push this forward to make sure that we are getting some recommendations and proceeding as we should. We have been in connections with MTI, with their safety and security team, to get some initial feedback from it and support and what the direction that we need to go. But from an earlier slide, we did talk about the staff is we have to access them as a consulting group as well.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can't delay moving forward with many of these things because sometimes the barrier is consulting with so many people that we don't get the work done that we need to do, and we want to make sure that we are consulting with people that are have the best advice around safety and security and know that with it. So we hear you.
Yeah.
It's just it's the timing piece of everything.
No, I get that. Yeah.
And I was just going to chime in that the safety and security team with MTA, that's a joint committee that's been ongoing for some time. And I think over time, and I get a lot of emails around safety and security as well, I think the general trends of exterior doors, interior locks, cameras are just these recurring themes that we've heard from staff for years.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And then also, do we have current policies on the use of cameras in our schools? Okay. And all right. Just wanted to make sure on that. And then also, I know, and Mary, you tell me if this should belong somewhere else, but I know we've been talking about infrastructure security, but we have a lot of behavior issues in our schools, and we have the BEP, but I know there are some situations within our schools that are happening that are of safety concern, and I'm just wondering where is that? So it is protecting our schools from the infrastructure threats, but behavior in our schools and ensuring that our teachers and our staff are safe. So I know I had proposed a committee that potentially is part of a board committee similar to the ERO ad hoc committee to discuss some of these issues. So Mary, is this something that we can talk now?
Yeah, no, I think because we do have the big budget item later, I really don't, and it's really not this is really the facilities part of it, and I think that as we look into the changes or rewrite of the BEP, along with that, I think we look at whether there's committees also, how are we getting the input? And do we in fact need another vehicle, another committee to get this input, or do we have groups that are already engaged, that have our staff voice, that have parent voice, that have community voice in them? And there are.
And that's the security team that you're
There's various.
I know you're saying you don't want to get into a big discussion about this, but just as a reminder, Gloria, there are two, I would say, major bodies that work on not just safety, but like more behavior-related disciplinary work. One is the safety team with MTI, that joint committee which we referenced. And the second, which is, I think, a committee that we need to talk about how to better leverage, because there are some phenomenal people in this group, which is the Guiding Coalition that Quinn helps support and is co-led currently by Ali Muldrow and Scott Strong. It's a Guiding Coalition on equitable disciplinary practice. Chris Carusi is on that committee. There's a wonderful, I think, current representation of staff, key community members with lots of expertise, parents, and it would be interesting for us to think about how to better utilize that body, informing decision-making at every level.
Yeah. Nikki?
Just a quick question. The ERO ad hoc committee is that on the chopping block for non-personnel priority actions, so that would be gone too, right?
Okay, so
yeah, we'll get
yeah. To that.
So just
Quick
wrapping up, Dean, yeah.
All right, have we thought about mixing and matching the door locks? Larger schools obviously would be more efficient to get the full electronic. Smaller schools go with the brass. Can we?
Yep, that's
that
option 3. Yes.
Was that?
That's option 3. Would be kind of a phased
mix it
approach.
up and some of it where it makes more. And even in some schools, it'd be easier. Where a door that's hardly used the regular on that doesn't need it. And it's just a way to save somewhere.
TJ, I'm going to jump in. I haven't spoken yet. So as I met with and saw this last week, and I think like most board members, I was quite taken back. And in fact, I recommended very strongly that it wasn't just one option that was put in front of us, and that's why we have multiple options here at various things. It's a lot of money. But when you break it down by school, it's still a lot of money, but it's about $100,000 per school. And so when we talk about the way I lean is get it done and just understand. I'm with you. I don't understand why a doorknob costs so much, but I also do trust our staff. In fact, I was like, oh, I just got a new doorknob. Yeah, and it locks.
Yeah,
it's under $100. But I think that the electronic is really important. I mean, certainly the exterior doors, and I don't think we can have alarms going off every time a kid props a door open. But we do need to know that it's open and that we can use our staff wisely to go there. So in fact, they can be used for other purposes and not just monitoring and going around and checking the doors, but we know. And I think the interior ones, it's taken me a little while to feel that that's a good use of resources, but I think that being able to make sure they're secure, and these people losing keys and coming and going and being able to electronically know whether the doors are closed or open and do that. I just think that that in the long term we're going to have to continue to move in this direction of safety with our students, and that this is just an investment, one-time investment we do to get to a level in which we know that we at least are controlling and monitoring the doors, and that whether they get in the building and then whether they get in the building and we have secured doors in the classroom is just something we got to do. That's where after a week of thinking about this, I think what we have to come to is our board members going to use this time between now and the board meeting to think more about this, or are we going to give an indication about what sort of proposal we'd like to see come to the board at the end of the month? TJ.
I would just like to address Gloria and just that traditionally in August we have a meeting where we talk about whether we want to have ad hoc committees and things like that.
Okay.
And I think
Great.
that would, it's usually in August. I think one year was in September. But anyway, I welcome that discussion around a safety one, whether in the context of VEP or a separate one. So I look forward to that.
Great.
And thanks for bringing it to the table.
Thanks.
It's a good idea.
James?
Yeah, in terms of selecting systems, I don't know if this suggestion would help, but after 9/11, most of your government buildings went to security systems. So there's probably all type of security systems right around us. And maybe you could go and view and get an idea how they're operating and maybe help in your decision making which type of system you want to implement. Because each one you're talking about is probably operating right around us somewhere. So just as a suggestion, if you want to get an eye on the system before you make a purchase.
Okay, any other comments on this before we move on to our next agenda?
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
I just want to make it on behalf of our team and reiterate, you guys have done a great job in a short period of time pulling together, which it's a powerful and I think targeted set of recommendations and investments. I do want to encourage you to consider making it happen. I mean, many of the issues that we've talked about today are long-standing, right? People have been worried and complaining about them for years, and it is the unusual circumstance, I think, where we can actually do it. The combination of the fund balance being as robust as it is right now, thankfully, and the possibility of the TID that's coming to closure soon creates a space where we might be able to actually move forward and not just do it halfway or part way in phases, but to actually get it done. And if we say safety and security is our top priority, I'd like to see us trying our best to follow through on it. So thanks, you guys. And thanks to the board for your input.
Yeah, I mean, I just I would totally support that, right? There's a lot of things we can't control with respect to safety and security, and this is, in the very unlikely event that we all hope never happens, this is something that we can do that helps keep our kids and our staff in a better situation. So, I think, yeah.
Thanks, Nikki.
If we can, we should.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the 2018-19 proposed preliminary budget review and input.
Okay, Mike and I are going to take this. Lisa, are you joining us? No. Oh, okay. I thought maybe you wanted to come on up here. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive in then, Mike. You ready? Okay. All right. Are we taking a little...
No, we're
a
not
break?
taking a...
Oh.
No, we're not.
Verify.
No. I don't know why we're...
No.
We've got a
Okay.
quorum here, let's go.
Yep. Yeah, we're moving ahead.
There's 5 of us here.
There's a long lead up in this.
Yeah. There is. Thank you. I'm glad everyone is.
makes
Yeah,
me a little
come on,
nervous.
we're not-
I'm used to Mike with no deck.
Let's get to slide 6.
All right, I'm going to start then. I'll do the
please
lead-in.
do.
This is the last stop for us on the budget process before we provide for you an updated draft of the preliminary vote or budget for a vote at the end of this month. As you recall from years past, this is generally where we like to resolve any remaining open issues in the budget. And usually it's also the place where we surface any final amendment ideas from the board. The major open items in this budget are 2. One, we just talked about, safety, which we will take your feedback and build in a recommendation accordingly. The other is compensation. which has been pending bargaining on base wage. All that drives a discussion we'll also have tonight about finalizing our proposed levy increase. Mike and I are going to walk you through our thinking on the open items tonight. I do want to keep in mind that we are working toward the adoption of a preliminary budget at the end of June, and it is preliminary. Final adjustments on the budget do not happen until October, so we've got some time to make final adjustments then. Could you go to the next slide, Mike? I think you've got the clicker over there. I want to also remind the board, if you could go to the next one, there we go. We started our budgeting process back in January with a high-level budget strategy to guide us. It has guided us well over these past months. That plan from the start included a commitment to stability on the benefits plan, which we're very proud of, a strong staffing plan that adheres to the class size policy, and not just any portion of the class size policy, but the column that says ideal class size is how we built the workbooks. We're very proud of that too. It focuses on a set of priority actions that's kind of leaner and even more strategic than it's been in the past, all aimed at accelerating results for our most marginalized groups, repurposing resources wherever we could find an opportunity so that we wouldn't have to make additional funding requests to align the budget to our priorities as a district, and of course an eye always on managing the tax levy with a multi-year perspective. The one major change that we've made to that high-level strategy we just did, and that's related to our compensation plan. You'll know that originally we focused the budget on improvement of the salary schedule and hard-to-fill positions. We've always said that compensation, we wanted it to be our lead foot in this budget. That remains true. But instead, we are changing the priority. You can see the kind of line making the adjustment in that first bullet by instead prioritizing full funding of step and lane movement and base wage to the maximum allowed by the law. That is all based on a tentative agreement with MTI that we just came to recently. We're very happy that we can make this change. We're quite thrilled, actually, that we're in a position where we can fund base wage to the max. It is by far the biggest priority in the budget at this point, and we believe it aligns to our guiding principles and goals for the budget overall. That does mean, and you'll see this in the later pages, that we've had to make some strategic adjustments to the budget in order to make that happen. We've tried to be just as strategic in the adjustments as we were in the building of the budget from the get-go. And we want to show you our thinking about that strategy in just a minute. Similar to the safety discussion we just had, we want to emphasize that we're not approaching this somewhat major adjustment in the final weeks of the budget process as a budget crisis. That is not how we see it. We see it as a significant adjustment to the budget, making strategic changes in alignment with our goals and priorities as the district. And we want to encourage you to think in the same way. This is not a budget crisis. We're just making different choices than we had thought we were originally going to make, right? They're just different choices, and still good choices. So we want to invite you to take that same approach to this final discussion these last couple of weeks. So let's dive into the specifics.
Sure. So we're going to tag team this. This next slide about the compensation plan is really the high level and simplified version of many of the points that Jen just made. There's an April budget on the left, the original preliminary. Remember this guy with the abacus on it? There's the June upcoming. And then actually, at some point, there's going to be one to the right, which is the October final. But we don't have to deal with that just yet. So this is intended to kind of illustrate the change from April to June. The step lane advancement is a constant in the April and June budgets, but the second line, base wage, in the April budget was at 0.50% increase. In this June, per our sort of pending proposal, base wage increases to 2.13%. In the April budget, there were several additive or targeted pay elements. In the June, those are all rolled up into base wage. Health insurance remained a constant. It was a goal of ours to not disturb all of that this year. But then lastly, in June, you'll see that this requires offsetting budget adjustments to support the base wage priority. And base wage is the priority in this April to June adjustment.
Yep.
Okay? This slide shows what that adjustment is all about. I'll just kind of explain the structure of it, and Jen will walk you through it. But essentially, to fund this change in compensation requires a $3.6 million reallocation. And here's how we would propose to do that. We show here a box on the far left called compensation plan. These are adjustments within the compensation plan. We started there. There's a section in the middle on non-personnel actions and or changes to our priority actions. And then to the far right, there are direct personnel actions shown here as either specific personnel vacancies on top or a reserve or unallocated approach on the bottom. For us to get to 3.6 million, we had to do the box on the left plus the box in the middle, and then some version of the box on the right. And as Jen said, you see a lot of bad budget decisions made at the last minute. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a school district, a municipality, or a private enterprise, it's important to stay intentional and stay cool-headed, right?
Yeah, that's right.
As you do this work. That's the setup, Jen.
So let me say a little bit about what's in each box, and Mike, chime in if I am missing something. On compensation, you'll see 3 categories of additional compensation items that we really wanted to do in this budget. The additive pay, that is for bilingual teachers and CC teachers who we know those positions are hard to fill, and we wanted to use that as an incentive to get people to come and stay in those positions. We had wanted to make some long-needed adjustments to the admin schedule to have quite honestly, just a more fair and equitable approach to paying principals. And of course, we agreed through handbook discussions that we wanted to make some changes. That we wanted to make some changes related to the salary schedule for support staff. We're proposing here that we prioritize the base wage and just go all in. Everything we have in the compensation budget bucket when it comes to salary goes towards base wage. That doesn't mean in the future we don't want to do these things. We think we do. We don't want them to fall off the radar, but we just think in this budget right now, we want to prioritize getting the base wage where we want it to be. So that's in compensation.
Can I make a statement about recusal?
Oh, yeah. I wondered if that's what was going on.
And I just discussed this, that this stuff is very intertwined together, and I recognize that. My intention is to participate in the discussions of all aspects of this slide except for the part of the support staff handbook that deals with EAs. And I will kind of pull back. I don't think I'm going to be formally removing myself from the table just because I want you to have the freedom of other people to move back and forth as the superintendent just did, talking about these in paragraphs and sentences.
Yeah.
But I will not be participating, and I will not be discussing, I will not be expressing any opinion on that in any way, shape, or form. So. that's my statement of recusal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Nikki, we're actually going to wait to get through this whole thing before we go into discussion, unless there's a clarifying question on just clarifying what something means.
Okay. So that's compensation. Next level, we went to non-personnel and a very close look at priority actions. I know looking at this list can look like a disinvestment in some things we care a lot about and our priority areas of our strategic framework. And I want to emphasize that what you're actually seeing here, similar actually to the first list, are in many instances things that we wanted to do but hadn't begun yet. So we're just holding back on not starting something that we wanted to do. So again, like the compensation bucket, we're not taking away, we're just not moving forward with the plan that we had initially devised. An example of that, the first two lines here, the 3 middle school MSCs and the FAST money, which would be for the community schools, those are priority actions built into this budget that we just would no longer forward, right? So we're taking those off of the priority actions list. It's work we hadn't started. We wanted to supplement the community schools with some FAST training. We haven't done that, so we're not going to begin that new work. We're just going to hold. The next chunk, which is about from the Parent Academy down to Grow Your Own, was a result of a very close scrub of all the departmental budgets again. It does not mean that we're not having a Parent Academy or that we're not doing FACE teams. All these things are still going to happen. We've just tried to be extraordinarily efficient in our budget and make sure that there's just no cushion whatsoever. We've gone back to the drawing board to be as precise as we possibly can about what expenditures are necessary to keep the work moving that we've already committed to. So I want to be real clear on that. I'm worried that the ERO ad hoc committee is a great example. We had actually beefed up the board's budget in order to help staff the ERO ad hoc committee. With that ad hoc committee coming to a close, my assumption would be that that funding is no longer needed. Strategic framework, $20,000. I had used some of my superintendent's budget, which is not a whole lot actually, but I had used $20,000 to fund engagement around the strategic framework this year, and the strategic framework will hopefully be rewritten in a matter of weeks, and we're not going to need that funding anymore. So we've just gone through and scrubbed every departmental budget, including mine and including yours. So everybody's having to pitch in and help out. And then the last kind of chunk down to the end are many of the adjustments that we would usually make in October. We always go through kind of a final round of October budget adjustments to tighten it up. And we're kind of just we pushed ourselves and did this work further in advance, and we're capturing it here. Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
Oh, no, I agree. That last bucket of items is well, I'll give you an example, the 2X independent charters. We normally would have the luxury of waiting to find out exactly how that turns out. We're kind of going on our best sense right now. The same is true of things like interest income, even workers' comp. We're kind of projecting trend. So we feel like it's reasonable, but you are seeing a change from June, taking action in June and locking into the preliminary budget versus October. And as you mentioned, Jen, on the top of the list, a lot of the priority actions, the nature of priority actions are that they're new. And often after a year or two, you realize that the cost estimates that you put in, can stand some revision.
Yep,
and that's what you're seeing there.
The last column, where we have some options to put out there, is where we're having to push ourselves and dig a little deeper in order to fund the adjustment that we're trying to fund. We could conceivably cut any open positions at the central office. We put this on the page because we know, that is technically an option that you could pursue. I've got to be real clear. We do not recommend pursuing that option. It's, first of all, a small number of positions at central office. These positions have already been going forward through the process of hiring. People have been interviewed for many of these jobs. And most importantly, we don't believe there's anything on this very short list of positions that are open that are things that we could cut without doing some significant damage to the organization. We would not be able to fulfill important functions in support of schools that we need to execute on. We think it would be highly problematic. Yeah, if we thought that there was some way to streamline, we would have built that into the budget already. Let's put it that way. This would cost us in quality of services that we provide schools. The other category, which is what we are recommending, but we're very sensitive to this, is the additional unallocated pool or reserve that was approved by the board last October, or a portion of it, to create some flexibility in the budget for us to add additional special ed staff. I hope you'll remember that. That was $1 million, I think, is that right? Yeah, $1 million. We're suggesting that the board consider using half of that unallocated pool in order to help us in this area. It's not funding that was spent this year, which is good. It means that we've used our already existing unallocated reserve in the special ed budget in order to fund those positions. This was sort of the next level. If we had to go there, it would be there. I'm very worried that this is going to signal somehow that we don't value or need students or special ed staff. That is not how we feel. I also want to emphasize, and Mike mentioned the October adjustments earlier, that when we get to October, just like you did a year ago, depending on where we land, we always have the opportunity to beef up the reserve again if we feel like that's needed. And I would just encourage the board to be thinking about that. Right now, we want to prioritize the base wage, make sure we get there, and we can always use our flexibility to make those last-minute adjustments in October, because I know no one really wants to go necessarily to this third level of budget adjustments, but we need to. We're going to get there. So, Mike, do you have anything to add before we wrap this page up?
No, Jen, I think that covers it. It really does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mary, do you want to pause here so we keep
No,
going?
I'd like to just go
Okay,
through.
then we'll
We
roll.
really have to,
We'll get there.
yeah. Pardon, Nikki?
Procedural question?
Sure.
On our past votes, since we voted for the $1 billion for special education, and then we also voted to amend the headbook, do those votes not count? Do we have to re-vote? Do we have to rescind our vote? How does that work?
That's so interesting. So your vote on the...
Because we voted that we were going to give $1 million to special ed.
And you did.
And we did, but we only used $500,000. If we use it somewhere else, do we have to re-vote?
That was last year's.
That was last year's budget, so you're voting on a brand new budget. That's right.
That's where I was getting confused.
Okay.
I just have a question that particularly actually both the middle and the right-hand side.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about a few of these things. Is now the time to do this or later?
No, we're going to,
You're going to get through it?
we're going to
Okay.
get through
That's
it.
what I
Yep.
was asked. That's why I asked you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then let's keep going.
Let's move, yeah, Mike, and I think
Okay.
the board has seen a
So-
number of these other slides before, so I think
We can go
moving
pretty fast.
through
Okay.
quicker.
So, so then I'll go quickly. Two or three slides to focus on the compensation plan itself, particularly beyond 18-19. As Jen said, we're pleased to be able to do this for 18-19, but at the same time, I think we need to kind of remind ourselves as to what's driving the existing or sort of traditional model of compensation in our district. And there's some interesting history here, briefly stated. In 2015-16, there really was not an issue as a budgetary issue around funding base wage, or certainly an issue from the labor side as to why CPIU max was 0.25. Not a great deal on the labor side, but as a budget issue, this issue of funding CPI to the max never came up. 0.25 was not exactly a high bar for us to get to. And we also held the line in health insurance. So 15-16 went fine. 16-17, base wage to the max dropped to 0.12. And we were able to get health insurance down to about a 2.5% increase. We worked with labor and put in an employee premium contribution that drove it down to 0. That's how 16-17 went. Current year 17-18, CPIU 1.26. We started out that budget with a 0.50 allowance, just as we did this time. We worked with our labor representatives and staff generally. We decided to change the health insurance plan. It drove negative, 0.76. We used that money to fund base wage and some other things as well. You might remember that starting pay for teachers was increased substantially. Summer school was increased as well. So that's 17-18. Now 18-19, you can see version 1 and version 2. We're focusing on version 2, where we're going to try to get CPIU maximum funded at 2.13. You can see the step and lane cost, and you can see the health insurance increase. As a package, that's 5.13. That's a bit of a stretch for us compared to previous years. Glad to do it. Just want to sound a note of caution. Look out to the right. As CPIU maximum continues to grow, and we know it is, the bond market knows it is, steps and lanes are always around 2%. Health insurance, upward pressure. You know that we've beaten up on the HMOs. There's going to be a bit of a correction there over time. You put those three cost elements together, and you're looking at 5, 6, and 7% increases in compensation. And unless you are really optimistic about state K-12 funding for us, you realize that revenues and expenditures are not going to line up. And that's not meant to be a doom and gloom speech. It's meant to say board and our labor representatives need to get a common shared understanding and start to figure out a compensation model that will work going forward. These are the same concepts, only reduced to dollars. It shows that we are able in 18-19 to make this move and still balance the rest of the budget. But in 19-20 and 2021, you're looking at deficits. If you add those two numbers up, you're looking at maybe $14 million in deficits if we were to try to sustain that traditional bundle of compensation elements. Here's the tax levy forecast.
Can I just chime in real quick on that last slide, Mike? Mike is making an argument about financial sustainability, which is incredibly important, but we've also talked a lot over this process, especially with our partners at MTI, about despite the large investments we actually make in compensation annually, that our employees, who we value greatly, aren't kind of experiencing the value that we're placing on them. And that may have something to do, and you can see in that little bullet on the bottom of the page about the distribution of salary and wages. This is why we're thrilled to be able to make this investment this year, but not only do we want to be mindful in the future of financial sustainability, but there's something about the compensation package that we need to take a close look at if our employees aren't feeling the value, that if they're not experiencing it. And that may have something to do with distribution, but it may have to do with other factors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So tax levy. I want to remind all of us that you don't necessarily have to make these budget reductions. The other alternative here was to increase tax levy. You could do that. And we've talked about that. Our thinking in this budget was that there are two things holding us back from going in that direction. One, the tax levy itself is already at 4.58% increase, we believe. It might move a little bit, but not that much. And that's higher than we have traditionally been at. I think the goal here has been 4%. Try to keep it less than that. The only reason it got pushed to 4.58 was because we have the 2X charters that we get to fund. The second thing is this concept of you have a certain amount, you have a terrific asset called unused levy authority. And in the face of an uncertain state budget that arrives 13 months from now, right? 13 months from now, a new state budget, not to mention the, the other variables we're dealing with. We're recommending that you would be wise to preserve as much of that levy authority as possible and save it for a rainy day, because that's just good long-term planning. This is the recent levy and tax base history. That shows the trend. The board has, I think, done a super job trying to balance the needs of the staff and students and the needs of the taxpayers over time. The one positive that we've got going for us here is tax base growth. That will help support a levy of 4.58, in that there are simply more entities helping to pay that property tax bill. You're dividing it among more taxpayers. And lastly, a couple of notes about the fund balance. Just a little 30-second background on this. Our fund balance was depleted substantially in 2012, 2013, and 2014. It was going the wrong way. We have worked hard to rebuild a budget that is sound. As TJ pointed out, the fund balance has increased by $10 million just last year, but unpacking that number, I think, is important. $5 million of it was based on a last-minute levy increase by the board, right? That was your new authority, and you used it to build up your fund balance. About another $1.5 million was from the fact that we took the TID 25 money in, $2 million plus, and didn't spend it all, because a lot of those projects got pushed beyond June 30th of last year. That created another $1.5 million increment. So it looks bigger than it really is, because that will self-correct. The other $3.5 million is, I think, the result of changing from some really unsound practices to what I think are much more sound practices. Two examples, and I won't go into great detail. When you create a vacancy, an estimate for a vacancy, what salary do you put in? Rookie teacher, mid-career teacher, maximum teacher, single benefits, family benefits? Well, we were crossing our fingers and hoping that everybody we hire comes in really at rookie pay and is single. Not true, right? We had to really upgrade our vacancy assumptions. And then secondly, another version of this, we know that with 4,000 positions, not every position is filled, every position every day, right? You just don't. You've got vacancies that happen during the year, 6-8 weeks, more sometimes. So this is called salary savings. And this is a little insidious practice that happened in Madison, where we started to assume, cross your fingers and assume, that we're only going to run at 99% of labor cost, or 98, or 97. And then cross your fingers and hope it turns out that way. Well, we changed that practice. We budgeted almost 100% of projected labor cost. We understand that at the end of a typical year, you'll see a $2 to $3 million fund balance increment. And then you're free to do it as you please. One caveat, remember, we don't recognize depreciation expense in our budget, and things do depreciate. That's a little history on fund balance. We do have the fund balance within board policy. It's always been within board policy, just moving from the minimum to the maximum, right? We're somewhere in between. We need our fund balance to be at about no less than 36 million, 37 million, no higher than 54 million. We're right in the middle. We think when we end this year, it'll be in the high 40s. 48, 49 million, and we just want to remind you that we have some draws coming on that. The 8-acre site north of Olson is one of those draws. The the safety funding that you just heard about is another potential draw, and there's a minor draw which may or may not happen on tech infrastructure. I think we might actually be able to fund that in their operating budget. But those are some things to keep in mind around fund balance. So I'm going to pause there.
Okay, I would like to, Mike, as long as you're there and you have a timeline here, I think in some board emails there was about the suggestion that maybe we didn't have to vote this month on the budget. I want you to take that one on. I know you sent around a response. I don't know if everyone saw that.
Yeah, I think that, and my response was not a legal interpretation. I didn't, what I was saying is basically two things. One, we don't have any authorizing instrument other than the budget to say whether we can hire person X or whether we can spend on something else. We need structure. I think as a control, you want us to have a budget to operate under. Secondly, hey, look, better to authorize a preliminary budget and come back and amend it if you need to. You can amend it a month later, but I just feel strongly as your financial person to say you need to be operating under some budgetary control. Remember, we spend $1 million a day, and having rules and accounts is important. So my recommendation would be go ahead and adopt a preliminary budget. I think TJ raised a point.
Mike, the other things you said in the email, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. One is that we do go out and we get interim funding. It's a large amount of funding to get, and that happens before the end of July budget. Is that correct?
So yeah, we have to.
So not having a budget could hurt our financing rates.
Yeah, I don't know if I put that in the email or if we just talked about that. So, you know, we do it's called a TRAN, tax revenue anticipation note. We're out there borrowing $70 million or so. And one of the first things that the underwriters will ask for is our budget. And those, we have to start getting that paperwork ready in the middle of July. So
and the other thing you mentioned is that the state, because the state preliminary estimate isn't actually based off of an actual spend, that you don't anticipate that the waiting for the state July 1 numbers actually will put us in any better position. Is that correct as well?
That's correct. I don't see if I understood the source of the question, it was, well, maybe equalization data will improve. And
since it was my question,
yeah.
let me, you know, I recognize that it's better to pass the budget before July 1st than it is after July 1st, for the reasons that Mike outlined. There are two things in my mind. One is that the aid estimate does give us more information, and when we're looking at our revenue and the emphasis that has been put on equalization aid versus property taxes, that having more information, again, it's only more information, it's not a final say, could be useful. And the second piece is that before us tonight, we have someplace, depending on how you want to count it, between $5 and $7 million worth of changes to the budget, that this is the first time they're before us, and we're expected to be dealing with these within 2 weeks. And that's a very, very tight timeline, and so that combination inspired the question.
Okay.
I do know in 2013 that we didn't pass a budget till August, that we can do a continuing resolution, that there are ways we can handle it. Again, the preference is clearly to do this, but I just wanted to put that on the table as a possibility if either one of those is compelling, and particularly the whatever, 3 to 7, 2 to 8, whatever kind of $1 million worth of changes that are before us tonight. If we don't reach a comfort level within the next 2 weeks on this, and this is really the only, we have this meeting and then the meeting where we're going to be voting.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, we're going to make sure everyone has their say, but also I think we want to make sure that we keep moving this towards getting some type of indication tonight. So
I don't mean to interrupt, Mary. I'm just curious what TJ's last sentence was.
That's it.
Cool.
It was probably
I
a
just wanted to know
summation.
it's a OCD thing.
Yeah. So Nikki, why don't you start it off?
It was a procedural question from before, and that was it. What I asked.
And are you're clear on that one? Okay, good. Dean, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I got it. I could probably live with most of this except for the support staff handbook cut. I don't support that. I'd like us to find something else. there was something specific that I was curious about having to do with just what the now that we offered the COLA for everybody, there was this in the handbook we have this, and then when our first proposal was a 0.5, and what the difference was now that we added in the COLA, but there's basically I just don't like that the student supports the staff handbook agreement was where we compressed everybody and it moved everyone up to 15, and then people that were at 15 already for many years got an additional bump. Is that accurate?
Yeah, this was this is created by the board's
was made.
approval of a $15 minimum wage.
Yeah, and then everyone that was already at 15 for many years would get some credit and move up a little.
So
is that how it worked out in practice?
In practice,
yeah.
If I can, I'll do my visual.
And it came to 432.
We thought we did this. We're going to move the low end up to 15. Just boom, right? The alternative version of that is we should do this. Everybody moves up because you're trying to keep some relative position within that unit. I could argue that both ways, frankly. When we did this work, we didn't really go into that so much as we said, look, win as a team, lose as a team. There are special pay categories here for teachers, administrators, NUPS, and support staff. We're taking them all, putting them all in the base wage. That was our approach.
All right, well, I would propose that we find 432 somewhere else. I'm fine with go to 4.62 and maybe even take a little run at the fund balance. Take $100 grand out of there. The unused personnel costs of a $500,000. Yeah, we should do that. And maybe we take a little out of the specific vacancies, the personnel costs. Not all, I understand that you want them and they're important, but maybe we take one out of there and just mix and match it somewhere instead of that one. I don't. Those are our toughest jobs. We did this, and everyone was in full agreement of it. And it's right. It's right that we do it, and I don't think it's right that we take it out. It's what we need to do to keep these folks satisfied and supported, and asking them to do all the hard work that we get them to do. So I don't want to do this to that on that. I want to find it somewhere else. Now, if you want me to make some amendments to it, I will.
Dean, why don't we go around? Do you have anything else on that point? Okay, why don't we, Nikki?
I would second Dean's statement. I'd like to look at how much we spend on building rentals now that we bought a warehouse. For a certain amount, I want to know how much that we could possibly save by not possibly renting some of the buildings that we were using for some of that equipment, if we were using it for that. Also want to look at what we use in contractors, if anything can be used cheaper local. It might not be, but I'd just like to see it.
Okay. Thank you. We already took the warehouse cut. Thank you.
Yeah, Kent.
Could you guys speak to what else you looked at that didn't make it on the list? So, I mean, all of us can go, look, you guys very kindly
provided us with
a lot of detail. Yeah. There's travel costs in like 7 different rows. There's professional services and at least 5 or 6. So what didn't make the cut and why?
Yeah. So
that you thought?
Our first strategy, as you know, is concentrating the money within the compensation plan. Our next, you kind of did this more by elimination. Our next goal was to not disturb the schools, their staffing in particular. And the rest of their budgets as well. So that kind of forced us into the next category, which is basically all your K-12, Doyle Central Office, FLOM type departments. We had the whole team, the whole budget team, instructional folks, HR folks, budget, business office people, take at least three runs at this in some fairly lengthy meetings. And we went through the whole list. First we did a review of all strategic priority actions for the last couple of years. How did they price out? Is there any money left on the table? Then we looked at all the departments current year to date, just in general. Who's leaving money on the table? Why? Can that be reallocated?
Mike, to that
yeah,
point,
I mean,
can you
it's pretty
respond?
thorough
TJ had
scrub.
some data on travel
Yeah.
expenses or conferences and what it had been spent year to date versus what
Yeah.
was in the budget. And
We looked at
it was a
travel.
significant-
We never get into many situations. Typically, travel will come up, consultants will come up, and substitutes will come up, and usually in that order. And we get that. Here's our take on travel. It's first of all, the board members are working from a limited document. To be frank, you're looking at a kind of budgetary control document, which is summarized at high level. Yeah. You have to really get at the more detailed reports to see which departments are involved, what is the nature of the travel, what do you picture when you hear travel? I think a lot of people picture airplanes, hotels, taxi cabs, Vegas, and it's not necessarily like that, believe me. And then, so we went through all that, and we also looked at the meeting room rentals as well. Some of that is just plain old lease stuff that we can't get out of, and others, we don't have.
Okay.
In the absence of an alternative site,
Maybe
we're
let me ask
kinda
the question
stuck
a different
there.
way, which is if you had to pick your next three things that you looked at,
right.
just like,
Correct.
I mean, we're working from a set that adds up to what we need. We have
Right.
0 degrees of freedom based on your recommendation. We can all pick things out of a hat, but we're, as you just said, not as informed as you. So what's your next three things?
Oh, geez. I don't even know where to go with that. All I know is that every time I've ever had to put together a budget adjustment list, we all agree on the positive end of the scale, that which we are investing in, and then we all, get upset about the source from which these cuts are being made. I think that this represents our best work. And, if we had to go back, we'd probably have to go back again over non-personnel Doyle departments and just go deeper than we've done here.
Okay.
What we talked about next, like doing the salami slice cut across departments.
all. Everyone takes
Everybody's got to
10%
cut
hit.
a certain percentage of the budget, which you do in budget crisis all the time. I've lived in that world many years. But we're struggling because we're not in a crisis. And to be
I understand.
cutting,
I'm trying to understand some of the optionality that's not on the page. So last question on the support staff.
Gloria and then TJ. Oh, was there?
Oh, yeah, I just had one more question.
Yeah.
On the support staff handbook piece, can you just remind us how many people does that impact, that choice, the equalization there?
Oh, geez. I'm going to dial a friend on that.
What's the question?
How many people are
How
covered?
many? I'm sorry, we don't have anybody from HR here.
affected by the.
44.5, according to the budget book.
Oh, all right.
Just look up the
Well done.
EASCA categories. Thank you. Just remember, it's not a cut. It's an add. It's an add of 432,000, either going into base wage or
But it doesn't impact
beyond
all,
base wage.
But it doesn't impact all support staff.
No.
Which is what my question was.
It does not affect all, most, but not all. Yeah.
Yeah. So next level, Kate, would be the salami slice cuts and cutting vacant positions. I think to be more concise
That's if
in
we
answering
cut.
your question.
We could go take it from fund.
That's if you
fund
cut.
balance
That's right,
and
Dean.
other places, so it's not necessarily a cut. It could be some reallocated, and we dip into just once in a while. Just
So, okay, we have Gloria and then TJ.
So, I mean, on that middle box there, the non-personnel priority actions, I mean, is there a narrative? I mean, you explained the ERO ad hoc committee, which was really helpful to me, right? But I'm just wondering, do we have an opportunity to give us a narrative of each one, right, and why? I mean, I think because when you look at ERO ad hoc committee, we don't know what that means until you explained it, right? So, And I have a couple concerns of a couple areas here. And so I think maybe some explanation would help me in making a decision.
We certainly could do that
Okay.
for each of these. A couple sentences describing what it is. 'Cause
Yeah.
I know I've heard concern about the ELL evaluation,
Yes,
maybe
right.
you've
That's
heard
where
that
I'm
too.
concerned. One of my concerns.
And that doesn't mean we would not do the ELL evaluation, we would still do it, but I'm looking around to see if Andrew's in the room, to the remorse maybe of our internal research team. They would be taking it on with some potential support from an outside person to provide some expertise, but we would take the evaluation internal as an example. But I think
that
you
would be
guys
helpful
deserve
for us and then
that-
also our stakeholders who are. Right. Okay.
TJ?
Okay, where to start? Kind of picking up on where Gloria was with that list in the middle here. I think more information on these would be very helpful in the context of decisions being made. On some of these, I can tell you, and just for purpose of giving feedback, that at this time, pending more information, I'm strongly opposed to eliminating some of these. I'm working from the list that is divided by funds. The Fund 10 list, the ELL evaluation, I want an outside evaluation. We approved a monitoring and evaluation cycle. We've had one outside evaluation done. That was a great disappointment. I want to see if we can get it right because I think it's very important to the ways we work. Secondary school student conferences and ninth grade mentoring are things that I'm supportive of and would not like to see cut. The HR Grow Your Own, I think that given all our talk about career ladders and all our issues around morale with our district, as well as the diversity issues that the Grow Your Own program has addressed, I can't see how cutting that could be a good idea. On the Fund 80, I'm particularly supportive of the FAST program. I think our community schools have struggled with implementation, and as we expand this program, I think that this is an important resource. FAST has a great reputation with a lot of people, and because it's so little money, the mentoring contractor. So that's kind of the ones that I would like to see funded one way or another. Like Dean, I'm kind of in favor of a mixed approach in that we take the cuts we can take. We maybe look at some other cuts, different ones than were on the initial list, and then we look at how fund balance and taxation are interacting with each other to get where we need to be as a general thing. With the column on the right, I guess I've got some questions about the reserve unallocated, and I think last year in preparation of the October budget, we received current staffing levels around special education staffing, with particularly school-based staffing and what those were at that time. I went through the budget book we received in April and tried to look at different places to add up and to try and recreate those numbers. And if you add them up from the equity charts, you get one number. If you look at the chart on page 36, you get a different number. If you look at the chart on page 38, you get a different number. And admittedly, these are all kind of snapshots in time with different criteria for how they were put together. But so if we can get the information we got last October for both the current state, where we are, the day schools closed last week, and where we anticipate being with this budget, that would be very useful, because I think that I wasn't the only one who found the fact that $1 million was not spent to be rather disturbing, when, especially in light of what we've heard from special education staff and parents and families about the struggles their students are having. I find it hard to believe that a decision was made that our students' experiences would not have been enhanced and improved by spending some of that money. So I'd like to know where we're at on that and see how that compares. That brings us to the right-hand, that's part of the right-hand column. I think that, I asked for a vacancy list, and I think almost everything on there I can see why we shouldn't even be talking about. But there are a couple of things there, such as, you know, that we've had a reorganization around special education administration that has led to that have been vacant all year, and those are positions that were added last year and that were never filled. And I think that that's a place where maybe we could be looking for from the top of the right-hand column. That's kind of the only one that really jumps out at me from there. But there's 2 director positions, assistant director positions that are unfilled, and 1 director, I believe, if I'm correct.
Due to retirement and
yeah. But one of the assistant directors has been unfilled all year, and the director itself has been unfilled all year. So I think that, you know, that's a place we should be looking. Finally, on some of the, I want to follow up on a couple of things that were in the email I sent earlier during the week. One is that you know, I understand. You know, I've talked to enough staff to understand that they drive to conferences, and that they don't that they're not staying in the presidential suites. But we still do spend a lot on conference travel, and I think that if we're looking to keep cuts away from the schools, that this is one place where we could reduce it by $100,000 or $200,000 as we're doing this. One of the items I listed, I really kind of came at it from ignorance, but I would like to know what the planned curricular purchases are for next year. Our budget by design lists curricular textbook purchases as $0. Last year, according to the March statements, it was about, we budgeted about $600,000. The year before, we budgeted about $1.6 million. So I'd like to know what the curricular purchases are and how urgent they are, and have some feedback on that, because I think that's a place where maybe we could roll back a little bit. So that's a request for information. And then also, I think a little more information about the urgency of the capital maintenance list. It's really nice this year, and I very, very much appreciate, Chad, the list of the projects that are planned for the next few years with estimated dollar figures. I mean, that's new and that's great, and it's nice to have it. But I'd like to also know that if we pulled $500,000 out of that, which projects would go, or if we pulled $1 million, which would go, and how those are going to impact things. So those are some places where I'd like some more information. And then my final thing is that as we talk about the mix that I talked about, this some cuts here, some cuts there, some reallocations here, the potential for using fund balance, the potential for property taxes. I want to remind that if we raise property taxes by $1 million, the average homeowner in Madison, it's $6. It's $6. Not a hell of a lot. So that's it.
Nikki, I'm gonna speak first before coming back to you. Yeah, TJ, you're right. If it's $6. The thing that I have seen over the last 6 years of serving on this board is that I think the smartest thing that we have done that has been able to have actually not really tough budgets over that entire 6 years is because we had unused levy authority. And we were able, and then we got referendum, but without that unused levy authority, we wouldn't have made it through. And we would have had much bigger cuts to our staff. And what we see ahead of us is it is going to get stormy. I mean, unless you have some very, very significant changes at the state level, I think we're going to have some really, really tough times. And I think we do have to hold firm and keep that levy authority. So it's not necessarily the $6. To me, it's the levy authority, and what we're doing is it provides stability. And we need stability in our schools. We can't be changing the staffing all the time and laying people or moving them off or sending these announcements that we might have to be laying off. That's really stressful. And for the most part, we've been able to avoid that. So, I mean, what I would like to see out of this, I would like to fund the $400,000 in the EA, SEA compression. And I'd like to find that money. I trust staff. I'm not going through the budget book. Maybe TJ has time to do that. I'm not going to be going through and finding 20,000, 50,000. I trust our staff to be doing that. And with regards, I think we should. In that last column, I think we should be taking some of that reserve coming back in October, and depending whether we need it or not need it, are there one or two positions in Doyle that haven't been filled that could do that? Dean, I like your approach, the putting together a package, although I wouldn't do it in additional spending. I wouldn't do it in fund balance or the tax levy, because that takes our unused levy authority that we're going to need. I guarantee you we're going to need that. And so I'd look and push a little harder. I know, Jen, it's tough. I appreciate all the work. But I'd support the additional amount with the on the handbook with the EA and SEA if we could hold the levy so that we have that unused levy, and we cobble together the rest of it. Otherwise, I trust on those middle column ones. I know that you would not be cutting anything that you know is really important.
Thank you, Mary. Can I clarify something real quick? Nikki, thank you for letting me interject. Mike, will you clarify for the board that 432 on the support staff handbook, the EA SEA compression is a portion of that amount. And I want to get real clear, because if that's what the board is advising us to go after, it's actually not 432,000. It is 200 something.
250. It's
250.
Yeah, it's 250. I'll find the reference while you're talking, but it's used 250 for
I just want to clarify that for everyone, because that's a lot easier to find. 432,000.
And that's
sound easy to find. It is not, I guarantee it.
It's on page 30 of your budget book.
Thank you, Mike.
And of course.
And
okay, so it's a little heavy to carry around. I get it. But page 30, it's $250,000. It's related to that $15 minimum.
I love this.
Way to go, Kate.
All right. Hey, you get extra points for that.
I am very impressed. Go to page, what did I say, page 30? It's $250,000 is related to that $15 hour minimum wage issue.
Right. Just to clarify, that's not listed in the budget book. The $32,000 is the AFSCME seniority amount, which is not actually included in the budget book on page 30.
There's three components. $250 on the $15 an hour minimum wage and its impact. Another $150 on improving the pay for long-term subs, and $32,000, as TJ just said, for some seniority type of adjustments within the custodial group, I guess.
Okay. And the long-term, so let me ask, on long-term subs, they were under the 2.13?
Yeah. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
that's right.
Okay,
Nikki, and then Dean.
I want the 432,000, that's my top priority. One, because I want to include those 10 individuals from AFSCME that the seniority change. I've been studying it, I've been researching it. They got stuck in a situation they didn't choose, and I think that needs to be rectified. Two, I am worried about our maintenance of effort when we didn't spend the full $1 million in special ed. I understand the issues with it, and I understand it may not have been needed, but I just want to make sure that we follow the rules of maintenance of effort.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'd love for that to be checked out. That's just a thing that my pet cause. And also the ERO committee. And I have a mixed view on EROs, but I can tell you one thing. I want to hear what the public has to say. And the fact that it has members of the public who actually are telling us information, then I think that's probably incredibly important.
Do you want to comment on that? Because I don't think you're saying that.
I think I need to lend some clarity on this whole middle list, because I just want everyone to know there is nothing on this list, with the exception of the first two, that we aren't still doing. We are still doing 9th grade mentoring. We're still doing student conferences. It's more about how much money we've learned that we need in order to execute on the strategy. So we're going to follow up and give you guys a little
That's
paragraph
great.
about each one. You got it. And I think that will clean up a lot of confusion. That includes the ERO ad hoc committee. What's here is just the, we're suggesting that the board reduce the board's budget by this amount of money because we actually beefed it up this year just for the ERO ad hoc committee. So we'd be basically bringing the board's budget back to where it used to be, because the ERO ad hoc committee is someday, soon, hopefully coming to a close. And we've already spent that money. We paid the people who supported the ad hoc, and yeah, so we just don't think we need it.
Grow your own
next
in
year.
the same category, Jen.
We
know, based on the size
We're not
of
cutting
the first
the program.
cohort, what they're going to cost in the second year. Because you can't jump in year 2. So we know we can cut year 2 because of the size of the first year
For now,
experience. It's
yeah.
not a cut to anything. It's just money that was budgeted is simply not needed there based on the size of the first year
We'll
cohort.
explain all
Okay, yeah,
that.
let's.
Perfect example.
because
There's plenty others.
We're going to wrap up pretty soon. Dean?
Yeah, the 432 is divided into 3 different areas, so you could give us a list of
Yep.
how we could do 1, 2, and 3. And
Okay.
that would be fine.
All right. We're real close.
We
I
are
know.
so
Yeah,
close.
this is-
$500 million
I don't
budget,
think
guys.
it's
We're
hard.
I
really
know.
close. Let's
I
not
know.
tear each other's
I'll live with the
eyes out
rest of
over this last set of adjustments. We'll be fine. We'll give you a report, and we'll give you something you can approve June 25th. I'm not that worried about it.
Kate had one final
agree.
thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I agree. I mean, I think this has been good work on everybody's part to get here.
Thanks, Kate.
And I'm looking forward to seeing the descriptions. I would love to see what your next 3 things are.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and ask my group.
This is a healthy exercise for us to do as a district, and it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we're continually scrubbing our budget, and making sure that
Absolutely.
we're focused in on where we really are spending the funds, and that those funds are making the difference that we want them to make. So I think it's very healthy to do and have some optionality.
I totally agree. My counterpoint to that is that's a much more fruitful exercise at the beginning of the budget when all
When we
options are
do
available.
departmental
And I'm not
review.
In
looking for
June,
$1,000
you're down to
items
just a
here.
few
I-
options.
It's
Just so
totally
you know.
fair. That said, I would like to see, and we spoke about this last week, the plan for us to engage in discussions about what our overall compensation plan in partnership with MTI
right.
looks like going forward. We are investing over 5% in compensation this year, over 5% increase, and we know that that's probably unsustainable to match with our revenue sources going forward. That is the message that I heard today. And that is a series of really critical conversations for us to get right as a group and to invest the right amount of time in it, which means we start now. So I would like to see the plan for that, honestly, at the same time as we approve this, because I want to do that conversation right. Our staff are our most critical asset in our district. The relationships they have with our kids are critical. I want some partnership, I think, from some of the folks in this room to help us have that conversation in the best way that we can, so that we can come out with a good plan for the district. So that's much more important to me than the 10 grand or 50 grand where we're going to balance out at this point. We got it. I believe
We're going to get
we can
there.
make that work. So
Yeah.
Okay, on to the last item.
Oh.
Fitchburg.
It's okay.
Tid.
So,
That's right.
I'm going to do this without paperwork, and I'll explain why. The board's going to be asked to vote in June on TID 12, which is in the city of Fitchburg. And typically you'd have had a one-pager from us at operations to set up the vote in June. We've had, we did not get our responses back from the financial advisor, Ehlers, for the city of Fitchburg until just today. But let me tell you essentially what this is all about. ProMega, obviously a huge employer, intends to do a $190 million major expansion of their campus in Fitchburg. About 95 million of that will end up being on the tax rolls. Some of it won't be, obviously. The city of Fitchburg believes it is appropriate to do about $14.5 million in TID investments to support that project. We don't have insight into the specifics of Promega's balance sheet to say whether or not they should be doing it themselves. I suspect that, you know, well, I know that's other people's role in this process, not the school district's role. My sense is that they are a national, in fact, international company. And while there are some things about the TID that I don't necessarily love, on balance, I think we're going to recommend it. We think that I'd prefer to see that investment, as I'm sure you all would, to occur here than elsewhere. And there are some weaknesses to it. We acknowledge that. But on balance, we're going to recommend that the board approve this TID with some conditions where we would ask our representative, TJ, who's an expert on all matters TID, to at least raise a few points at the Joint Review Board regarding the debt structure and some of the other underlying assumptions. It's not perfect, but we think it's worthy of support, and that will come up on the agenda on the 25th. TJ, do you have anything to add on that? Are you familiar enough with it to comment?
I agree with the recommendation, or the probable recommendation. Right. Some issues around the debt structure were already raised at the initial meeting because there's 2 meetings before TID can be passed. And I guess the other thing is just to note, because this might be something that comes up with other TIDs before us, is that part of my hesitancy, and again, I agree that we should be supporting it, has to do with the fact that it's a overlaying TID, and essentially what it is that there's a previous TID done that is nearing maturity, and when a TID matures is when we start to collect the taxes from it. Mm-hmm. And by doing an overlay TID, what you're doing is pushing back for a maximum of 22 years before those ones that should be closing out eventually. So there's a game that's being played with an overlay instead of a closure. You know, as a school district, our position on TID should be, you know, get in, get out, and get the cash. I mean, and this one is there's a delay in getting in. We're delaying getting out of one of the old ones. So that's my one kind of place of discomfort. Maybe 1 or 2 of the old ones. TID 3 and 4, I think.
We should probably have an offline conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. I tried to set up a meeting, Mike. I did.
Okay. Are there any questions around that? Okay. Well, then I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Ahmad, your advisory vote? All in favor? We're adjourned.